The show Silo is set in a post-nuclear future. You've got thousands of people living in a giant missile silo that is hundreds of stories underground. Nobody knows where the silo came from. Nobody knows who built it. And it's not like all these people just got plopped there one day and they were like, wonder what happened here. They don't remember because it was erased from history. 140 years before them, there was a rebellion. Complete revolt where the rebels wanted to open the door. The attempt was thwarted. The rebellion was put down, and it's now celebrated in something called Freedom Day. But 140 years ago, the rebels took a piece of history because they burned old books, and they also destroyed a lot of files. So they literally know nothing. They don't even know what caused the war. So all of these people have no idea what happened before Freedom Day, 140 years ago. Ever since then, they've continued to work as a society inside. And the reason why the silo has continued to work is because of rules put in place, like you can't go outside. If you ask to go outside, you will go outside. But those that have done that in the past, they've died. Now, there are cameras set up so you can see what's going on outside, but it's bleak. The ground looks torn up, the trees are all dead, and they're able to actually see the bodies outside of those who asked to go. So for all intents and purposes, it seems like a pretty solid community. And they have everything. They've got a mayor, they've got mechanics, they have a sheriff named Sheriff Holston. And that's where we'll start off, with Sheriff Holston and his wife, Allison. Holston is the sheriff of the entire silo. Allison, his wife, works in tech. She works in the IT department, filing paperwork and fixing computers when tickets come in. But what these two desperately want is the chance to have a baby. Now in the silo, because space is so limited, you have to be approved to have a baby. But they get approved. And it means they have 365 days to conceive a child. But after that, birth control goes back in. When they get approval, they get very excited. They quickly head to their doctor, and their doctor takes out the giant birth control that was placed inside Allison. Now, the clock is ticking. Now, the thing about getting approved for pregnancy is that everybody knows, so people start congratulating the couple. But there's one person that walks up, and she wants to help. Her name is Gloria, and she's kind of looked at as a kook. She offers to help in the fertility, and when she walks away, Allison asks her husband, what does she do? And he says she goes right to the edge of promising people a baby if they do what she says, which is fraud. Sheriff Holston doesn't think much of Gloria. Once the couple get back to their quarters, they start going at it, trying to make a baby. But afterwards, they have to head to work. Allison recently posted an article about how others can recover old files. She knows it's against the rules. She also knows, though, that it would cut down on her workload. She ends up getting reprimanded by her boss, Bernard, for this. Bernard walks away, and he looks like a guy with a stick up his ass. He ended up taking the article down. Fast forward a couple of months later, and they still don't have a baby. They're still going through their normal life, but it's frustrated the couple. But everybody in the silo is preparing for Freedom Day. The mayor is on edge. She always gets nervous around this day because it's a huge event. And if terrorism were going to happen, it would likely happen on that day. So she meets with Holston and his second in command, Deputy Marnes. She just wants to make sure they're prepared. And both the deputy and the sheriff convince her that everything is fine. And Freedom Day, like Freedom Days of the past, will go off without a hitch. But as the sheriff was talking to the mayor, Allison had just happened to run into Gloria. Gloria asked how the couple was doing in terms of conceiving a baby, and Allison admitted, not yet, but we're hopeful. Allison tries to get the hell out of there, but Gloria says, no, I just wanted to ask you a question, but I want to do so in private. So Allison and Gloria go back to her apartment. The first thing Gloria does is turn on the water, because as she tells Allison, I don't want Judicial to hear. And Judicial is like the silos version of the NSA, the CIA, FBI, all into one. So just to cover her bases, she turned on the water to drown out any conversation they might have. She asked Allison, did you ever wonder what was on the servers that the rebels erased? And the books they burned? If it was even the rebels who did it? Allison is starting to get uncomfortable because this conversation is illegal. But as she tries to go, Gloria stops her and says, one last thing. Do you actually think you're somebody they want having a baby? When Allison does get home that day, she does end up telling the sheriff about the conversation with Gloria, and the sheriff is pissed off about it. He wants to go arrest her, but Allison stops him and says, don't. Her and her husband couldn't have a baby, and she just wants you to look into the reason why. But as far as the sheriff's concerned, there is no reason. They just didn't conceive one in the 365-day period. That's it. The next day is Freedom Day. It's a big, big holiday, but Allison has to work. She figured that she would be on call because the sheriff was on call, and she ends up getting a ticket submitted. It's from a guy named George. He has a repair stall in the middle of the silo, and recently he's been submitting a lot of tickets. Everybody kind of dreads going there, and now it's Allison's turn. So when everybody's celebrating Freedom Day and listening to the mayor, she goes to visit George and see what's the problem. But there actually isn't one. This guy's been submitting tickets hoping that they sent Allison. They sent everybody else, but now he's finally got her. He brought her there because of what she wrote, that article about recovering old files. He knew that it wasn't a mistake. He also knew that it would be deleted soon, so he printed it out. He didn't ask for her because he didn't want to draw suspicion from Judicial. They have a law against owning relics. Basically, items before 140 years ago. They destroy all that stuff. And what he has, he doesn't know if it's a relic or not. So he didn't want to take the chance. But he wants her to look into it. He's got this old drive that was found by somebody about a year ago. He fired it up, it looked empty, but then he tried what she wrote, and there are files on it. The computer says most of the drives are in use, but he can't find any files, so he needs Allison's help. She sits down and starts going over some techniques, looking for these missing files, and after a few hours, she finally finds them. It's the silo's blueprints. It's really exciting to George, but it's pretty scary to Allison. She knows that if they're caught doing this, they're both going to be in big, big trouble. So she quickly leaves, letting Mark look over the stuff. It's all she can really think about. She certainly isn't focusing on having a baby, which is all the sheriff is thinking about. Although at this point, it's kind of becoming a chore. The next day, she calls out of work and heads to Gloria's and says, okay, why don't they want us to have children? And Gloria tells her it's because they don't want people that think independently to have children, raising independent children who might cause a revolution or a revolt. So they keep the birth control inside of them, making them think that they took it out. It's pretty crazy, but Allison has now tried to have a baby 3 different times, and she's been unsuccessful, so she's starting to believe it. The day after that, she also calls out of work, although this time she heads to go meet with George. She tells George, I want to see everything, and he opens up all of the files. The last file they look at is a video file of the outside, although it's like nothing they've ever seen before. The grass is green, the trees have bloomed, and you gotta remember that Allison has lived her entire life in the silo, looking at the same visual. So this is blowing her mind. When she gets out of there, she cannot concentrate at all. All she's thinking about was how they've been lied to their entire life. When the sheriff alerts her that they have a meeting with the doctor the next day because their 365 days is up, Allison says, yeah, that's cool, I'll meet you there. But when it comes time to actually show up for that meeting, Allison's nowhere to be found. The doctor, the sheriff, they wait for a little bit, but finally the sheriff goes looking for her. And he finds her in their house in a sort of subdued state. She sits him down and says, we need to talk. I knew that if I told you this, I would need proof, so I got it. She doesn't rat Gloria out, but she tells the sheriff Gloria's theory, that they were never going to let him have kids. The enforcers want docile people, not people like her. It's really hard for the sheriff to believe, but she says, well, I have proof. He didn't take out my birth control because I just did. And she's holding her birth control pill that was injected into her, and she's bleeding pretty badly. When the sheriff sees that, he rushes into action, running to go get the doctor, and he's stopped by Deputy Marnes, who lets him know that his wife is in the cafeteria causing quite a scene. After the sheriff left, Allison went to the cafeteria and started telling everybody that everything that they've known so far is a lie. That outside, it doesn't look like that. That bleak landscape. She's bleeding pretty badly, and she seems like she's going off the deep end, and the sheriff tries to calm her down, But then she says the 5 words that you are not supposed to utter. I want to go outside. And once someone says that, it's done. They get arrested and prepared to be sent outside. The sheriff knows what it means. And he also took an oath. So when he, the deputy, and the mayor all convene about the situation and they try to figure out a way where they can kind of save Allison, he says no. I mean, we'll look into it, but everybody heard her say, I want to go outside. And by looking into it, they question Gloria, and they also bring George in. George admits to seeing Allison, but also says she never came back. And when the judicial team searches his stall, they don't find anything. That's because George hid it really, really well. So unfortunately, there's nothing left to do. Right before Allison is supposed to be suited up and sent out, Sheriff Holston goes and has a conversation with her. She swears that she's not crazy, and that outside, it's beautiful. She uncovered all this stuff about the lying, but the biggest one is the fact that if she gets sent out there, she won't die. Judicial has the ability to change what they see on the screens, and they're using some kind of filter to do it. The sheriff still doesn't believe any of this, and she says, well, think about it. I mean, the people that were sent out there, the most recent ones, they swore that they wouldn't clean. But then they got out there, and what did they do? The first thing they did, they cleaned. And it's because they wanted us to see what they were seeing. So I'll tell you what, when I get out there, if I am wrong, if it is as bleak as it looks right now, then I will just walk away. But if I am right, if it is beautiful out, then I will clean. And you will know that I am telling the truth. They then have to get Allison suited up, and it's really emotional for the sheriff because he has to kind of read her rights. But then they send Allison out. And this is an event that the entire silo watches. They get really pumped to see whether or not the person sent out does clean. The sheriff, though, watches alone in his jail cell. Everybody else is really excited when Allison walks up to the camera and cleans it. But the sheriff, now he's thinking differently because he's remembering what it meant if his wife were to clean those cameras. He then watches as Allison tries to walk over the hill, but she stumbles, falls to the ground, and seemingly dies like everybody else before her. 2 years later, the sheriff is still the sheriff. Although the pain in his heart from watching Allison die hasn't gone away, especially considering every day he looks out, he sees her body. Since the loss of Allison, the sheriff has become pretty despondent. Deputy Marnes, though, comes to him one day and says, I got something you should see. George, the guy who Allison went to in the market, he's turned up dead. Looks like he fell off the stairs. People are thinking it's a suicide. But no one saw him go over, and there's an engineer all the way at the bottom that thinks it's murder. So Marnes and the sheriff go to investigate. They look over the body, and then they go to meet with the engineer who made the claim. Her name is Juliet Nichols, and this is the first time that the sheriff is meeting Juliet. And a short time after he meets Juliet, the sheriff does exactly what Allison did. He wrote a couple of goodbye notes to some people, he locked himself in the jail cell, and he told the deputy, I want to go outside. Now, the deputy noticed a change between the sheriff after he met Juliet, because the sheriff was dead inside until he met Juliet. So something changed. And he asked the sheriff, what was it? And the sheriff says, I finally started listening to what my wife wanted me to hear. So I'm going to go outside and I'm going to find her. In episode 2, Marnes is wondering what exactly happened between Holston and Juliet. Because in his opinion, it seemed like after the two met, that's when Holston's whole mood changed. And it's partly true. Because shortly after Allison had showed George what was on that file, he got really excited. That was the breakthrough he was looking for. George, coincidentally, had been dating Juliet. Now, it wasn't a sanctioned relationship, so they had to kind of keep it hush-hush. But because they were dating, Juliet knew that George liked to dabble in artifacts and also was searching for something. Although he wouldn't explain what it was, and he just told her, when I find it, I'll know. Now, because they weren't sanctioned, they usually wouldn't hang out together publicly. But one day, all the engineers are having a party because Juliet is getting an apprentice. George showed up, and it was a surprise, but she let him know that everybody in the down deep, which is basically what they call the bottom of the silo, everybody down there knew, and nobody cared. He still didn't want to show too much affection. He just let her know that he got something big, and he didn't want to reveal what it was right then and there, so he said he would tell her later that night at her place. But when she got off work and she went to her place, George wasn't waiting for her. although he was there because there was a package waiting for her. When she opened it up, it was a very old Pez dispenser. Nothing inside, just a dispenser. And then there was a note that said, "Remember where you were the last time you saw this? I found what I was looking for." Juliet figured that she would just talk to George about it the next day. But when she woke up, she found out that George had committed suicide, falling over the balcony to his death, and it rocked her to her core. She knew that George didn't actually kill himself. He showed no signs, and plus, he clearly wanted to tell her what he found, so this made no sense at all. She went to the police officer in the Down Deep, a guy named Hank, and she told him that George did not kill himself. Hank knew that George and Juliet were seeing each other, and he kind of just figured that maybe Juliet was being a little bit reactionary to this because she was a little too close to it. And because of this, he tried to explain to her that there's got to be a thing as motive and reason, and she just didn't have any proof. And the bigger issue is, because they were in an unsanctioned relationship, she couldn't even really voice any concerns. But she got really frustrated, and finally, Hank agreed that he would send it up top to the sheriff, who he called an upstanding guy, and he would voice it as a fellow coworker voicing concern. The next day is when Holston and Martin showed up and met Juliet for the first time. They went to the scene of the crime, or the suicide, whichever way you look at it, and Juliet is definitely uncomfortable because she doesn't want to let on too much, but she tells both the police officers that George did not kill himself. It just made no sense. And they, just like Hank, tried to explain that it does look like suicide. And sometimes people just hide their emotion and their pain really, really well. But that's actually something that Juliet knows all too well, because both her little brother and her mother committed suicide, and she's the one who found the body. So she knows something about this kind of tragedy. And she was convinced that George didn't fit the criteria. Holston and Juliet then go to the coroner to check George's body for any signs of a fight, a skirmish, anything that could point to this actually being a murder. But they don't find anything. That includes any sign of a previous attempted suicide. So it's not like Holston completely dismissed Juliet's theory. Hank and Martins then walk into the room and let Holston know that judicial's on their way. They're going to want a briefing on everything that happened. Holston nods and then sends them off to go see if anybody was on the stairs or anybody knows anything about why George wanted to jump or anything that might have happened. He and Juliet then go to have a private conversation, just the two of them. He tells her that he's aware of the fact that the two are in a relationship. He's not going to tell on them, but he does wonder why the two never got sanctioned. She doesn't answer the question. She does, however, say that George left something for her. It is a relic, and it does mean he's going to have to confiscate it, but he promises not to tell Judicial where he found it. So before he does have that breakdown with Judicial, he goes to Juliet's apartment, and she shows him the Pez dispenser and then half of the note. She shows him the half that says, "Remember where you were the last time you saw this." She then takes Holston to where that was, and it's a part of the silo that he's never been before, and he doesn't even know exists. Deep in the Down Deep, there's a sign that says, "Do not proceed beyond this point. It is a punishable violation of the pact." But when you take that sign off, there's a tiny little hole in the wall. That leads to a tunnel that has graffiti written all over it, and Juliet's pretty sure it's pre-rebellion. But that's not what she wanted to show him. No, it's deeper in the silo. There's a hole in the floor that leads to a makeshift ladder, and when they climb down the ladder, Juliet flips some lights, and they are in a giant cave with a monstrous contraption below. Juliet figures it's what created the silo. The founders dug this deep hole, and instead of pulling the machine out, which would have been too difficult, they just threw 30 feet of concrete over it. Below the machine is just nothing but water. And she has no idea what is below that water, and she doesn't want to know what's below that water. George had seen drawings of a door, and he always was looking for it, but to Juliet's knowledge, she doesn't know if he ever found it. All of this is blowing Holston's mind, because he's lived his entire life in the silo, and none of what he's seeing has ever been discussed. And after all, he is the sheriff. Juliet then takes him lower to a little tiny platform that George kind of carved out as his own nook. He's got some shelves, a bed, some essentials, but she pulls out a box and tells Holston the last time that she saw the Pez dispenser was in that box. But all that's in there are just some old relics. One of the relics in the box, though, is something she's never seen before. It looks like an old camcorder, but they're not sure what it is or even how to work it. She then, however, notices that there was a wire that was tied to the spool, but the spool is empty. And then she starts following the wire, and it leads her to what George found. The drive that Allison had unlocked, and then directions on how to unlock it. At the time, though, neither Holston nor Juliet had any idea what they had in their hands. All they knew was that George did an awful lot to keep this hidden. After all, only he and Juliet even knew the place existed, to their knowledge, although Juliet guesses that maybe some higher-ups know about its existence. Either way, George took painstaking labor to make sure nobody would find it. One thing, though, catches Holston's eye. It's the fact that on the back of the printout on how to recover deleted files is his wife's handwriting. This sparks a little bit of an argument between Juliet and Holston. Holston admits that George and Juliet knew each other. And when he admits that, Juliet gets really angry. Because she starts thinking that the only reason that Holston came down there was because he wants to figure out if George had anything to do with Allison going out, cleaning. He completely deflects, telling her he's going to have to give Judicial all of this contraband. And she doesn't want him to do that. She wants Holston to go find George's murderer. It gets pretty uncomfortable between the two. Juliet at one point saying maybe if you listen to your wife, she wouldn't have gone out to clean. When cooler heads eventually do prevail, he promises Juliet that he will look into what happened to George, but in the meantime, she's going to have to be quiet, not draw any attention to herself whatsoever. He promised her that when he found something, he would send word. It would be a signal and she would know what it meant. So he went up to go have that meeting with Judicial, and weeks later, Juliet still hadn't heard anything until all of a sudden she heard that he was going out to clean. Just like with the cleaning 3 years ago, this is big news in the silo. Everybody gets around. Everybody's watching it. And in the Down Deep, Juliet is watching it amongst her peers, and they see Holston go out. They see Holston clean, and they see Holston try to make his way to Allison's body, which is still there. But then he does something completely shocking. He tries to take his helmet off, which they've never seen before. And that's because what they don't know and what they don't see is that when Holston got out there, it was just as Allison had predicted. It was green. He actually says to himself, oh my God, she was right. And while in the silo they could see Allison's body, outside, she wasn't there. There was no body. There was just green grass. After a little bit outside, Holston started having problems breathing, so that's why he took off his helmet. And as to whether or not he actually collapsed, we don't know. But as soon as he did collapse, Juliet got so pissed off, she just started screaming, he's a liar, and she stormed out. Juliet got so mad that she went to the only person she felt comfortable talking to, a woman named Martha. Martha fixed up old tech, old appliances, but she had kind of been a mother figure to Juliet ever since the age of 13. She knew that deep in that rough exterior, there was still a hurt little girl who found her brother and her mother dead, and Martha felt for her. Juliet tells Martha everything that happened with Holston, and she's infuriated because she waited and never heard anything, and now Holston's dead, and she might never know what happened to George. After talking to Martha, Juliet decided to do some investigating of her own. She went down to that little nook that George had carved out for himself, and even though she was terrified of water, she decided to grab some rope and go searching if she could find what George was talking about. Maybe she could locate a door. But right before she hits the water, she drops her flashlight, and she's pretty terrified. Now, way up, and I'm talking 100 floors up, in the silo, Marnes meets with the mayor. The mayor is completely stressed out because without a sheriff, she's worried about order turning to chaos. She tells Marnes that she looked through all the old ledgers of the previous mayors and there's not one instance of a sheriff being sent out to clean. And what really is concerning to her is she has no idea how the rebellion started. So for all she knows, the rebellion started because a sheriff was sent out to clean, and without a sheriff, chaos ensued. So it's of the utmost importance that they get a sheriff and get one right away. Now with Holston, he was named sheriff by the previous sheriff. That guy just retired and said Holston will be the sheriff, and it was done. She thought that Marnes would be perfect for the job, but he tells her, I'm retiring. It won't be me. So Judicial sends their candidates. They send 3 dummy candidates that are horrible with the actual candidate they want mixed in. It's a guy named Paul Billings. He was in the police force, but he left to go work for Judicial. So this is a way for Judicial to have a puppet as their sheriff. Marnes tells the mayor that he's not the worst candidate, but he's certainly not the best. And the mayor just says aloud how she wishes that Holston were to just name a successor. And that's when Marnes reluctantly tells her he did. He shows her a note that Holston left for him, and it names Juliet Nichols as the new sheriff. Marnes was reluctant to tell the mayor because naming an engineer the sheriff made no sense. And to Marnes, it was just more proof that Holston had kind of lost his way. But the mayor tells Marnes that she'll go and meet with Juliet. Maybe she'll be able to see what Holston saw in her. So the next day, they're planning on going to meet with their possible new sheriff, not realizing that she is as far down as you can get in the silo, hanging above a bunch of water. In episode 3, Juliet is able to crawl up the rope and she doesn't die, although she's pretty traumatized by almost falling into the water. She ends up passing out that night in a drunken stupor, awakened the next morning by one of her coworkers who can tell that something's going on with her, and she asks Juliet, come on, what is it? But Juliet doesn't reveal what's actually eating at her. Instead, she deflects. But she has a good reason for it. She feels shaking, and she knows that it's the generator that is causing that shake. Juliet's main priority as an engineer is to take care of that generator. The generator creates the electricity for the entire silo. If that thing goes down, they're all screwed. So she rushes downstairs to find out what exactly is going on, and she finds her apprentice messing with it. But he didn't have a choice because Juliet showed up for work late. Juliet's able to fix it, but she gets in trouble with her boss, Knox. He's actually in charge of the engineers, even though everybody kind of follows Juliet's lead. And this segues into an argument between the two because Juliet has been trying to tell Knox for a while now that they need to shut the generator down and actually fix it. They've been basically piecemealing this thing together with duct tape and elbow grease, but eventually, if they don't actually properly fix it, it's going to die on them. And then they really have an issue. And Knox is reluctant to shut the generator down because it's never been shut down before. He makes the point that an hour in darkness could cause utter chaos in the silo. They start screaming at each other, and eventually Knox says, we will have this discussion tomorrow when you're not hungover. Now, while Juliet is sobering up, the mayor and Marnes are making their way down the silo to meet with her, although she has no idea they're coming. This is going to be a long trip for the two, and it's going to take more than a day for them to get all the way to the down deep. The mayor and Marnes pass by Judicial, but they decide not to stop, which they know they'll probably hear about later. And they do hear about it when they make their first stop, which is at IT to talk to the head of IT, Bernard. Judge Meadows, the head of Judicial, found out that the mayor just walked on by, and she wasn't too thrilled about it. But that's because the mayor didn't want to hear about Paul Billings being sheriff, not when she's going to talk to Juliet about taking over the job. Once they get into Bernard's office, he tells both Marnes and the mayor that his numbers indicate Paul Billings is the best candidate for the job. The mayor then asks what his numbers say about Juliet Nichols, and he says, I don't need to look at the numbers. I know who she is. She's a thief. She stole 4 boxes of tape. It was reserved for IT, and it's not just any kind of tape. It's heat tape that we use to protect our servers from cooking. The mayor lets Bernard know that Juliet, who might or might not be a thief, was Holston's pick. And he can't believe that the mayor is truly considering her. But the mayor is. But this tape thing really is stuck up Bernard's ass, and he has a vendetta against Juliet, so he pushes Paul Billings on the mayor, but it's just not what the mayor wanted to hear. Her and Marnes head out of Bernard's office, and they continue down the silo, meeting and greeting people. A lot of these people haven't seen the mayor in years because they just live too far away from her. One of the things she likes doing is greeting people, but she also likes stopping by levels and seeing the newborns, which she does in this one particular level of the silo. It's not the babies that she really wants to see, it's the doctor. Because the doctor is Juliet's father. The mayor and Marnes are just doing simple vetting, but their questions are valid. Juliet was born in the mids, but she lives in the down deep, which is just kind of unusual. And Dr. Nichols tells both of them that he's kind of been estranged from Juliet for a while. After the tragedies that they suffered, he didn't stand in her way when she requested that she go to the down deep and become an engineer. She'd always shown interest in that sort of thing, so he didn't want to keep her from it. And because of his current job, he has trouble ever talking to her because he can't make it to the down deep and back in enough time to deal with his patients. The doctor is clearly uncomfortable talking about it. He makes up an excuse to get out of there, and it leaves the mayor with more questions than she has answers. But she continues on to the down deep. Marnes and the mayor continue to make their way down, but eventually they have to stop off for lunch. As they're enjoying conversation, the mayor gets a gift from Robert Sims, who is one of the heads of Judicial. It's nothing major, it's just a dessert, but the mayor doesn't appreciate it. She feels like it's a bribe. Even though she doesn't take too kindly to the gift, Sims continues pushing for Paul Billings as the mayor of the silo until eventually the mayor cuts him off and says, "I'll make my decision when I'm done with my trip." After lunch, the mayor and Marnes finally make their way down to the silo, but they make it at an unfortunate time for engineering because the generator is once again acting up. On top of it, Knox wasn't prepared for this. He didn't know they were coming, so it wasn't like they could prepare for an arrival. It's kind of an embarrassing situation for them. Knox tries to play it off like there's nothing to be worried about, but the mayor can tell that there's something clearly to be worried about. And that's when she sees down from the office a woman rush in and start feeling the generator. And she asks, "Is that Juliet?" And Knox says, "Yes, it is." Unaware of the fact she's being watched, Juliet is trying to listen to the generator to find out what is wrong with it. But it's the same problems they've been dealing with for the last few years. Juliet heads in the generator and does a temporary fix. With the mayor waiting for Juliet to finish the work, she decided to continue the vetting process by going and talking to her former friend, Martha. These two used to be super, super close, but it's been some time. You get the sense that there was a falling out between the two somewhere down the line. They make a little bit of small talk until eventually the mayor asks Martha, "Who is Juliet Nichols?" And Martha gives the mayor some kind of satisfactory answer because when the mayor does finally meet with Juliet, she offers her the job. The mayor explains that nobody wants Juliet for this job except Holston and herself, which comes as a surprise to Juliet. But Juliet turns it down. She tells the mayor that everybody thinks their job in the silo is the most important, but hers actually is. She keeps the generator running. And right now, the generator needs her. While the mayor doesn't agree with it, she does understand, and she walks over to Juliet and says, "Holston wanted you to have this." And she hands her his badge. The mayor and Marnes say their goodbyes and then start making their way up the silo. While they do that, the engineers start questioning Juliet on why in the world Holston would want her to be the mayor, and she tells them, "I have no idea." At one point, Hank asks her to see the badge, and she throws it to him. But that's when Hank notices that something is carved in the back of it, and that something says truth. Juliet remembers what Holston told her, that if he found something, he would send her a message that only she would understand. And she's pretty sure that truth is that message. So she runs up the steps trying to track down the mayor, and when she eventually does, she tells her, "I'll accept the job. But first, I need to fix the generator. And that's going to require shutting the generator down." Marnes and the mayor both have the same reservations about shutting the generator down that Knox did. but Juliet is able to convince them that if they don't shut the generator down and properly fix it, they're in for a very rude awakening one day. So the mayor agrees to shut the generator down and have the silo in complete darkness for 8 hours. That's going to let engineering go in and hopefully fix this thing for good. Right before they do this, the engineers all get together, they game plan on what they're going to do, and when the time comes, they jump into action. While the engineers are fixing the generators, the entire silo's in darkness, and the mayor can't sleep. She decides to go chat with Marnes, who, by the way, is crushing big time on the mayor. He is in the process of drawing a picture of her, which he hides. The mayor starts talking about life after being the mayor, retirement. And it turns out that Marnes' feelings are reciprocated because the mayor likes herself some Deputy Marnes, and the two end up kissing. It's hot. But as fireworks fly all the way up in the silo, in the down deep, things aren't going great. Juliet and the rest of the engineers are having trouble with the generator. They're going to be cutting it extremely close, but they end up getting the job done. When they turn on the generator, it sounds great, and the silo is once again illuminated. The next day, Juliet gets ready to take up her new position as sheriff, but before she does that, she has to stop off and apologize to Martha. The last time those two talked, Juliet had some pretty mean things to say, and she wanted to apologize. After she apologizes, she gives Martha the camcorder-looking device that she found amongst George's things. Juliet tells her that if she figures out what exactly it is, to let her know. She then says goodbye to her mentor and starts to make her way up the silo. But Juliet getting hired is still a hot-button issue for Bernard. The mayor and Marnes once again run into Bernard, this time on their way back up, where Bernard voices his displeasure at the mayor's decision. But Bernard's comments don't stop the mayor. Once she does reach her office, she makes it official, putting pen to paper and making Juliet Nichols the new mayor. She also wants to celebrate the new relationship she's having with Deputy Marnes, so she tells him, "Grab a drink. Pour me a glass. I'm going to head to the bathroom." But she never gets to have that drink because she drops dead in the bathroom. Somebody clearly poisoned her. And Marnes tries to save her, but it's too late. In episode 4, we get to look back at Juliet's past. She had a great relationship with her family, her mom, her brother, and her dad. But once her brother and her mom died, her and her dad just couldn't see eye to eye. Eventually, a 13-year-old Juliet got sick of it. She headed down to mechanical because she liked fixing things, and that's where she met Martha. She forged a note from her dad saying that he was okay with her taking up residency in the Down Deep and becoming an apprentice with the hopes of doing something. Martha didn't know Juliet, but she did know her mom. And when Martha tried to send Juliet back up to the mids, Juliet pushed back. And Martha recognized that because Juliet's mom would have done the same thing. Martha then called in a teenager by the name of Knox and told him to take Juliet under his wing. The thing is, Martha knew that that note was doctored, so she did end up making a call to Juliet's father, and he arrived a day later. He asked Juliet if she was okay, and she says, "Yeah, I'm tired. They work me really hard down here, but it helps me forget about losing my mother and my brother." And because of that, the doctor let Juliet stay. Adult Juliet, though, is very far from being that little girl. No longer working in the Down Deep, she's excited to get her start as sheriff, although it gets jump-started pretty quickly when she arrives to find that the mayor has been murdered, and Marnes isn't doing so well. You've got Bernard and Sims also in the room trying to calm him down, but he wants vengeance against whoever did this. What really is breaking him up is the fact that he's convinced the poison was meant for him. Marnes tells both of them that whoever did this did it in the mids. They did it at the deputy station because they went for a walk, and that would have been the time where their bottles would have been poisoned. He demands a list of people that they might have encountered from the mids who had a criminal record. The more Bernard and Sims talk to him, though, the more upset he gets. He also does not want to talk to Juliet. In fact, nobody in the room is a fan of the fact that Juliet is becoming sheriff. But Bernard, who is the mayor for the time being, is going to honor the last wish of Mayor Janes. Bernard, Juliet, and Sims decide to let Marnes blow some steam off, cool down a bit. So they let him be. This gives Juliet a chance to get acclimated to her new surroundings. Sandy, who used to be Holston's assistant, is tasked with showing Juliet around to her office and her new quarters, which used to be Holston's. It becomes apparent to Juliet pretty quickly that Sandy feels the same as pretty much everybody else, that she doesn't deserve to be sheriff, although Sandy doesn't do a good job hiding it at all. Anytime Juliet asks for something, Sandy's response is, "You'll get it when you're sworn in," even though Juliet being sworn in is just a formality at this point. The thing that Juliet really wants is George's file. Sandy gives her attitude about it, kind of complaining about how she's following orders, but she doesn't understand why Juliet's there, and Juliet cuts her off and explains, "I'm the sheriff, I'm your boss. So can we get over whatever this is and you go get me George's file?" And a very reluctant Sandy walks out. Once she does leave, Juliet starts looking around the office for any clue of what Holston might have found. Although after a bit, she comes up empty and she just decides to go to her new apartment. Once she does arrive, the first thing she notices is how hot it is in there. She turns on the air conditioner and she hears a rattling sound going on through the vent. She didn't think anything of it. In fact, it kind of calms her down a bit because she's so used to hearing things like that being from the down deep. So she doesn't try to fix it. She does find a card that welcomes her as a new occupant, but says, "Please send any unwanted items of the previous tenant to recycling for proper distribution." There's nothing really that fits that description left in the apartment, so for Juliet, that card really doesn't mean much. There's then a knock at the door, and it's Bernard, with a deputy holding her new uniform as sheriff. She's also going to be sworn in as the new sheriff. Juliet says aloud how this is kind of ironic, Bernard being the one to do this because he is, after all, the one that accused her of stealing. And he once again asks her, "Well, did you steal?" And she says, "No, I appropriated it because we needed it." Bernard then tells her that she was not his choice for the position. But considering the recent events, he figures it's best to just let bygones be bygones. And they both agree to let that just be in the past, forge a new working relationship together. Now, officially being sworn in, she has access to all those things that she didn't before, so she continues to start looking around for a clue that she's not finding. And her day gets worse when Sandy lets her know that Judicial doesn't have a file for George. She does, however, have a file from Holston that was left behind. And once Juliet looks in it, there's a lot of pieces of paper, but one sticks out. It says, "Double the flowers in front of the mirror." Juliet doesn't even get a chance to really think about it because Sandy comes in and says, "Are you not hearing the radio? You need to go. Marnes is getting in a fight right now." Once Juliet goes to see what's going on with Marnes, he's got some poor soul jacked up against a wall as he starts beating on him, demanding to know answers as to why he poisoned the mayor. And this guy didn't poison the mayor. Juliet is able to cool down the situation, and she goes and takes Marnes for a drink, like coffee, because alcohol is the last thing this guy needs. It's becoming a trend, but he tells her the same thing that everyone's told her, that Juliet was not his choice for this job. And she feels like it's a good time to explain why she took the job. She tells Marnes all about this hidden clue from Holston that was left behind. And then she makes Marnes a proposition. "You help me find out who killed George, and I'll help you find out who killed the mayor." And Marnes is in. Marnes was able to get that list of guys who had a criminal record that they might have encountered. Up until this point, his whole vigilante justice wasn't going so hot. But the next name on his list was someone named Patrick. He and Marnes clearly have a past, and they also clearly do not like each other. But Marnes didn't come to talk to Patrick. He came to talk to Patrick's wife. Patrick finds that a little funny because his wife died a year ago, and he blames Marnes for it. Marnes makes a snide remark about how Patrick's wife died the moment she met Patrick, and Patrick goes off and clocks Marnes right in the face. Juliet, once again, has to cool that situation down, and she takes Marnes back to his apartment. She asks, "What's up with this Patrick guy?" And Marnes explains that Patrick Kennedy had previous issues with extortion and also robbery. There was also a jam with Judicial over relics. To Juliet, it seems like Marnes just kind of has a vendetta against this guy, so she's going to let him handle that. But she decides to ask him if he ever noticed a hard drive in Holston's safe or apartment or anything. And Marnes tells her, check recycling. Any personal effects of Holston's would have ended up there. And up until this point, Juliet hadn't even considered that they probably already cleaned his apartment out. So if that hard drive were there, yeah, it probably would be in recycling. She's going to look into it, but then they start talking about the whole situation with the mayor. She understands why Marnes is convinced that he was the target for the assassination, but she thinks there is a possibility that the target actually was the mayor. I mean, after all, she is the mayor. And Marnes just doesn't buy that. The mayor was well-liked by basically everybody. To him, he can't figure out who in the world would want to kill her. That's when Juliet notices that Marnes has a picture that he drew of the mayor hanging on his wall. And she knows that this was way more personal than she even realized. She decides to let Marnes be, but asks him, should we put a deputy outside if you are so convinced that someone's out to kill you? And he says, no, don't worry about that. I got a shotgun. I'm good. Once Juliet leaves, Marnes decides to start drinking and taking out his frustrations on a heavy bag. He does, though, get a visitor. It's Sims. Sims is pretty surprised to see the state of Marnes, like his face being banged up. Marnes tells Sims how it was Patrick Kennedy. He went to go visit his wife because his wife had threatened Marnes a few times, and she definitely meant it, but he found out that his wife had died. And this doesn't really come as a surprise to Sims because Marnes kind of has that personality that invites you to punch him in the face. Sims, however, did not come to just chat with Marnes and make sure he's doing okay. He brought good news. He tells Marnes that Judge Meadows is ready to make Juliet a former sheriff and put Paul Billings in the position. All they need is Marnes and Mayor Bernard to sign off on it. If only Sims were to come to him about 2 hours ago, he would have been all for this. But after him and Juliet had come to an understanding about their relationship, Marnes isn't about to oust her from the position. He, though, doesn't tell Sims this. He says, yeah, I'm not ready to do that. She knows that she's not wanted, so let's let her screw up, and then she'll end up back in the down deep before you know it. While those two were chatting, Juliet had made her way down to recycling. She asked the woman if she came across a metal box that might have had a bunch of paper with some writing in it, and the woman tells her no. That kind of description, she would have remembered something like that. So Juliet, a little frustrated, just says, well, if you come across it, let me know directly. Juliet then made her way back to her apartment, but she had to go through the cafeteria to get there. She runs into a guy, though, in the cafeteria. His name's Lucas, and she's noticed him before, but it's odd. He's sitting by himself, and he's just staring out into the abyss. They have a very awkward interaction. Lucas trying to be friendly and nice, and Juliet just being extremely uncomfortable. Once Juliet is able to get out of that conversation, she continues to make her way to her apartment, and she gets a radio from Martha. Martha tells her that she's come across something that requires her insight. Martha is intentionally trying to be kind of covert, because after all, anyone could be listening to this broadcast. And Juliet, picking up on that, just tells her she'll find some time to get down there and find out what she's talking about. Martha then asks Juliet how are things going, and Juliet tells her, well, she actually thinks she's found an ally. But Juliet doesn't know that that ally, Marnes, he's getting tuned up that night. He is plastered. And it ends up being the last night he gets tuned up. Because that night, Marnes is attacked in his apartment. And while he puts up a good fight, the guy ends up getting the shotgun away from Marnes and ultimately killing him. Juliet, though, is unaware of this murder. She went back to her apartment, and the first thing that greeted her was the sound from the vent. And then she thought it was kind of weird. She decided to investigate it, and it turned out that that was a hint from Holston. He had left it there. It was a metal washer attached to a string, and when she pulled the string, there was George's file. In episode 5, Juliet looks over the dossier of George's death, and What she finds is the fact that George kept his mouth shut. He said that he acted alone, and he gave Judicial no information whatsoever about what he may have wanted to hide. There's a knock at the door, and Juliet goes to answer, and it's a telegram telling her to come immediately because Marnes is dead. When she does eventually arrive at Marnes' apartment, she's greeted by Sims, Bernard, and then Paul Billings, the guy that Judicial really wanted in her place. Paul, though, isn't confrontational at all. It seems like he just wants to be a good cop. The first introduction that Juliet has to Paul Billings is Sims telling her that Paul is now her new deputy. Bernard's big concern with all of this is keeping a lid on it. He doesn't want word getting out that there was a murder. It's going to be tough to do, but Sims will try his best. Bernard asks everybody to come to his office while a cleaning crew comes in and takes the body out, and Juliet asks for 1 minute alone. She starts surveying the apartment, and she notices something. It's the fact that the hand-drawn picture that Marnes did of the mayor is gone. She finds that kind of interesting. She then looks on his person, and she's able to find the list of suspects that he had collected. He hadn't finished that list yet. The first one circled is Patrick Kennedy. She keeps all of this information to herself, and then she heads to Bernard's office, where she meets once again up with Sims and Paul Billings. Bernard is really new to the job. He's not quite sure how to handle this. You had the mayor murdered, and now you had Marnes murdered. Sims starts coming up with an idea, but Juliet cuts him off and says, we should bury them together. Bernard actually likes the idea. He thinks that they could play this to their advantage, saying that Marnes and the mayor were in love. Doing a double funeral for a couple that wasn't married is unheard of, but Bernard wants to do it because then that becomes the story, not the fact that they were murdered or even how they died. There's a little pushback from Paul pointing out that if they were in a relationship, it's unsanctioned, and Bernard thinks that that could actually work to their favor because these two were so old, no one's really going to care, and also, if they do, it's even better for them because that's all people are talking about, an unsanctioned relationship. Sims states that if what Bernard is looking for is a distraction, then what they should do is something called a forgiveness holiday. It boosts morale. It's good for the silo. Bernard, however, shoots back that a forgiveness holiday is simply good for Judicial. No, what he's planning on doing is pushing this story that the two were in love, and then he's going to offer a race to the top. The winner of this will get something called the Johns Trophy. Bernard's not a big fan of races, but it is an excuse for people to drink beer and yell, and that is good for what they need right now. Sims isn't a real big fan of any of this, so he heads off to leave, but before he does, he turns to Juliet and says, I stopped by Marnes' apartment last night because I told him that we should make Billings sheriff now, and he disagreed, but not because he thought you would succeed, it's because he thought you would fail. He continues being pretty nasty until finally Bernard cuts him off and says, all right, man, it's enough. Once Sims finally does leave and Billings is out of the way, Bernard gives Juliet some advice. The pact, the massive document on all the rules in the silo, it implies that a sheriff basically has to kiss Judicial's ass. Translation, buddy up with Sims, or it's going to be a rough career for you. Not too long after, everybody has the funeral and it's well attended. A couple of speeches are made, and it works because no one's questioning why Marnes or the mayor were killed. When Juliet returns to her office from the funeral, she's greeted by an old friend from the Down Deep, Deputy Hank. He got invited to the funeral, but he decided not to go. He's more interested in what she told Martha on the walkie-talkie, that she might have found somebody to look into the George thing for her. And Juliet has to tell Hank, yeah, we just buried him. Hank knows that this job could be pretty difficult for Juliet, so he reminds her, if you need anything, just let me know. Juliet heads into her office. She starts reading the pact, but she gets interrupted by Sandy. Sandy comes in guns blazing, telling her that she knows the only reason she took this job was to find out who killed George Wilkins. She's worried that that might cloud Juliet from the real goal now, finding out who killed Marnes. So she tells Juliet, if you want my help, you will find out who killed Marnes, because everything in this office goes through me. And Juliet reminds Sandy, yeah, I'm finding out who killed your buddy. That's my job. Sandy says, no, I'm talking about you finding out who really did it, not who Judicial can find as a patsy. Juliet asks, why would Judicial serve up a patsy? And Sandy tells her, that's because Judge Meadows doesn't give a shit about the truth. The only thing she cares about is maintaining order. And when a mayor and a deputy get murdered, things could get out of order. Juliet jumps right into action, going and trying to figure out who killed Marnes. She is tasked with bringing Billings along, even though that's the last thing she wants. She doesn't want to babysit this guy, and she doesn't trust him. But he knows the pact. Means he knows the rules, what she can and cannot do. They start going through the list, and Juliet decides to send Paul home for lunch, because she'd just rather do this thing herself. Billings can tell that he's not wanted, so he does end up leaving, agreeing that they would reconvene back in the office later that day. The first place Juliet heads is Patrick Kennedy's apartment, the one that's listed on the sheet. He's not there, so she decides to break in. They're doing a little bit of snooping. Not only does she find rat poison, she finds the picture of the mayor that Marnes drew. Looks like this is pretty clear cut. But as she's leaving, she gets caught by one of the other residents who asks her, "What the hell are you doing?" She tells him that she's looking for Patrick Kennedy, and he just says, "He's not here." And that's because Patrick Kennedy doesn't live there anymore. After his wife died, they moved him to a single apartment. So the fact that all this evidence is in the wrong apartment is red flag number 1. Now that she knows that, Juliet went and found Patrick Kennedy to get him to safety. She doesn't tell him, though, why she's doing any of this. Now, while Juliet was doing all of this, Paul Billings didn't go back to his apartment for lunch. He went to go to Judicial. He goes to Mims's office, but Mims already had a guest. It's a guy named Doug Trumbull. And Doug Trumbull is the one who killed Marnes. Although Paul Billings doesn't know that. He does know who Doug Trumbull is. He knows that he's trouble, and he can't believe that Billings is considering this guy as a candidate for Judicial. Once Billings actually sits down and talks to Mims, he gets the patsy's name. Although Billings doesn't know he's a patsy. And he rushes back to the office where he finds Juliet, and he's excited to tell her that he did head to Judicial. Not to rat her out, he just wanted to see how the investigation was going. Juliet's a little surprised that Judicial even has their own investigation, and Billings tells her that they get reports from people who don't officially exist. Judicial's reports have better intel than what the Sheriff's Department knows, and everything the Sheriff's Department gets is secondhand after Judicial sees it. Judicial got reports from these people that don't exist. They call them Friends of the Silo, and what Judicial was hearing was that someone named Ralph Melby was the one who killed Marnes. Juliet, upon hearing this, rushes out and tells Sandy, "Hey, get me an arrest warrant for Patrick Kennedy." And Billings tries to tell her, "No, I said Ralph Melby." But Juliet she didn't even hear him and says, "Kennedy first." She walks away from Billings and Sandy follows her out because Sandy wants to know what's the update. And Juliet tells her that she knows that Ralph Melby is a patsy, but also he's the wrong patsy. Judicial is hoping that Juliet would arrest Ralph Melby. It would make her look incompetent when they actually frame Patrick Kennedy, their actual patsy. This would get Juliet fired, this would get Billings the job, and Juliet would be back in mechanical. So in order to stop this from happening, she needs to rush over to Patrick Kennedy's apartment before they clear it or get the proof that they're looking for. When Juliet does end up getting to Patrick Kennedy's old apartment, sure enough, there's Doug knocking on the door demanding that somebody answer. And Juliet tells him, yeah, it took housing a while to find out that his wife died a year ago and Patrick was moved to a single. It's probably why Judicial still has this apartment listed as his residence, which means you planted evidence in the wrong apartment. And Doug takes off running. Nobody really seems to notice because that race to the top is going on. And while the race is going up, Doug rushes down the silo. They do end up knocking into the runners at one point, and Doug is able to knock Juliet over the balcony as he tries to free up her hands so she just falls and dies. Luckily for Juliet, a couple of spectators notice what is going on. They rush to her aid, but it allows Doug to get away. Juliet, however, is saved. When Juliet gives the description of the guy to Paul Billings, he knows right away that it's Doug. He tells Juliet that he'll get Judicial Security to get an arrest warrant right away. They're not going to get the opportunity to arrest Doug, though. Doug decided to go ahead and meet with Sims after screwing up. Sims gives him a whole backstory on his life growing up. His dad was a janitor, and Sims always was embarrassed by it, but then he realized that the janitor was actually the most powerful person in the silo. One day, Sims' dad told him that he wanted to show him something. He took him to a door that said janitor. He told Sims that he would have to make a decision right then and there. He could shadow his dad, become an apprentice, but he could never tell anybody what was on the other side of that door. Or he could forge his own path. he decided to forge his own path. He gives Doug the opportunity to do the same thing by welcoming into Judicial and asking him if he wants to officially be a shadow. And Doug is excited and says yes. Sims then asks him if he's willing to do what it takes for the good of the silo. And Doug once again says yes. And that's when Sims throws him over the edge. To Judicial, to Sheriff Nichols, it looks like a suicide. She has to give her debriefing to Judge Meadows, and she breaks down that Doug was trying to frame Patrick Kennedy for the murders. Knowing his arrest was inevitable, he decided to kill himself. Meadows is kind of dismissive of everything that Juliet has to say. She acts like Juliet is crazy for having this theory because she worked with Doug Trumbull for 7 years in Judicial. She never saw any signs of it, and Sims backs her up on this. They don't know why he would do such a thing. Juliet tells Judge Meadows that they'll look into the why, but the judge tells her, don't spend any more time on this. We have the killer, and he's dead. She heads back to her office where Sandy is waiting for her because Sandy is getting moved. It's pretty confusing to Juliet because Sandy came in just a few days ago demanding that Juliet help her if Juliet wants any of Sandy's help. And Sandy admits that she didn't think Juliet would actually find the killer. But the fact is, she's sick of everything up top. She wants to get lower so she doesn't have to deal with the bureaucracy. Later in the day, Juliet goes and meets with Bernard. Bernard admits to Juliet that while he doesn't want to do it, he's got to admit Sims may have been right. What the silo really needs is a forgiveness holiday. People get a little wild when they have one of these, so he's going to need Juliet and all the deputies just on alert. He then tells her that he was wrong about her. He didn't quite see what Holston saw in her, but now he does. He's willing to help her in anything she might need. And at the moment, the only thing she needs is 2 days off. She wants to go to the Down Deep, visit her friends. As she's leaving Bernard's office, she once again sees Lucas sitting by himself in the cafeteria just staring off in the stars. And curiosity gets the best of her, and she asks, "What are you doing?" He tells her that when it's really clear at night, these lights show up in the sky. He has no idea what they are, but he's been watching them long enough to see that they have patterns. These patterns repeat like they're in a big circle. She starts looking, and sure enough, there are things that she's never noticed. Lucas just says, just add it to the list of things we don't know about. And yeah, they don't know about stars, but it is weird. The next day, Juliet heads down to the Down Deep, and a little while later, she shows up and she heads straight to Martha's. She's worried about Juliet. I mean, after all, she was dangling from the staircase and everybody saw it. And she asks Juliet, what the hell is going on? But Juliet simply says, I can't tell you. Juliet then gives Martha an update on the hidden file with George, and the fact that nothing in it was stuff that Juliet didn't already know. She then asks Martha if she made any headway with the camcorder that she left her, and Martha says, actually, yeah, I did. There's a little sticker on it with writing, and when you use a magnifying glass, you still can't see what it says. But that magnifying glass that Juliet is using is the most powerful magnifying glass that Judicial will allow, which begs the question, why would Judicial destroy magnifying glasses that magnify things bigger? Martha says, for me, there are two big mysteries about the pact. One is the fact that they stipulate we can't mechanize the way we go up and down the silo. The second is no magnification beyond a certain power. So a relic like this is going to get you more than a slap on the wrist. Something with wiring this small, the effect is going to be a lot more dramatic. Martha's really concerned for Juliet's safety. All these people dying. She's worried that if Juliet continues to look into this, she will end up dead. So she begs her to give up the badge, but Juliet tells her, I need to find out what happened. I need to open up an investigation that allows me to look into what happened to George. All I have to do is use the right bait. She then goes and gets it. It's the Pez dispenser. In episode 6, Juliet used that bait. She planted the Pez dispenser in Doug's apartment so that when her, Paul, and a couple other deputies went to search his apartment, they would find it. She allowed Paul to find it. That would hopefully open up an investigation that she could dig into and look into why George was murdered. The next day, though, when Paul shows up for work, he's surprised because Juliet still has the Pez dispenser in her property, and she's supposed to take it to Judicial. In fact, it's against the pact that she's kept it this long. They start arguing about the pact because Juliet has done some research. She's actually been reading up on it. What the pact says is she's allowed to keep the relic if it's involved in a serious crime. And she feels like murder is a serious crime. The relic being found there is interesting. But Paul points out that yes, the sheriff can keep the relic as long as Judicial signs off on it. That means later that day, Paul and Rebecca head to Judicial. They meet with both Sims and the judge. Juliet shows both of them what they located in Doug's apartment, and that comes as a big surprise to Sims. Sims is definitely suspicious, but Juliet asks the judge's permission to look into it, because nobody in the room knows exactly what this relic is. They just know that it is a relic. Before the judge can even answer, Sims starts arguing with Juliet about the fact that this relic did not belong to Doug. He knows this because Judicial has all the relics cataloged in a database that is way more advanced than the one that the sheriff would have knowledge of. Sims does point out that what Judicial does know is the watch that Juliet is wearing once belonged to George Wilkins, the guy that she claims is murdered. She doesn't deny it, but it does leave Sims pretty suspicious. And even though he's suspicious, he still thinks that an investigation into the relic would be a smart play, especially considering they're having a forgiveness day. It could open up more relics being turned in. Once Juliet and Paul leave, Juliet tries to get rid of Paul, telling him, yeah, kick rocks, I'll see you in an hour. But Paul says, that's not going to happen. Now that Sims is giving you permission to do this, he's going to have eyes on you at all times. He's trying to pin you on something. So, like it or not, I'm with you today. Reluctantly, Juliet agrees, and the first place they head to is Patrick's. She asks Patrick if he knows who deals with relics, and he claims dumb. He's reluctant to tell her anything, especially considering Paul is with her, and he doesn't know Paul. Eventually, though, he does give up a name. Her name is Regina Jackson, and when Juliet and Paul get there, she's not the most welcoming, especially considering it has to do with George. She recognizes the watch on Juliet's arm, and she tells Juliet, I used to be his girlfriend. And that stops Juliet right in her tracks, because she thought that George was hers, and hers alone. And now she's finding out that George was double dipping a little bit. And from the way that Regina tells it, Regina wasn't a big fan of George, because she feels like George used her to get what he wanted, i.e. relics, and then he moved on to the next thing, i.e. Juliet. Regina tells both of them that she's not a relics dealer. George just had her buy things for him. Other than that, after George went down to mechanicals, she never heard from him again, so she can't really help out. Right before they leave, Juliet asks Regina, do you have any questions for us? And Regina says, yeah. When he told you that he loved you, did you believe him? And Juliet doesn't even dignify it with a response. She just walks out, but you can tell she's troubled. Now, while those two were investigating, Sims was doing an investigation of his own. He went to those judicial archives, and he looked into the Pez dispenser, and sure enough, it's in there. It's even registered to a George Wilkins, which Sims finds really interesting. The fact that Juliet is wearing a watch that they know was George's. The fact that they know that Juliet claimed George was murdered, and the fact that now Doug just so happened to have an item that was also known to be from George. It's all too much of a coincidence for Sims. So Sims, along with Bernard, head down to visit Juliet in her office. And Juliet's taken completely off guard when Sims tells her that Judicial knows that the relic belonged to George. But when they searched George's apartment, they didn't find it. Now, mysteriously, it turns up in Doug's apartment. And they know it never belonged to Doug. So for Judicial, it's all too much of a coincidence that Juliet is wearing the watch of a dead guy she claims was murdered, and now the dead guy's relic turns up in Doug's apartment. Juliet, thinking on her feet, points out that it was actually Paul who found the relic in the first place, not her. And Paul doesn't say a word, although he knows that he was being used. Juliet, though, does get a lifeline when Bernard asks Sims, hey, is it possible that Doug was one of the people that searched George's apartment? If he was, then it's very possible he saw the relic, he thought it was cool, and he just kept it, never turning it in. Sims doesn't believe it, but he also can't argue with it. Bernard then asks Juliet if, in her search, they found any reason of why Trumbull would want to kill Marnes and the mayor. But Juliet says, no, not yet. Bernard is cool, though, if this remains unsolved. When Bernard and Sims eventually leave, Paul confronts Juliet about why she would plant the item in Doug's apartment and then put him in a situation where he's the one to find it. He's really pissed off about this because her actions could have gotten him jailed or, even worse, sent out to clean. And he's got a family. He's got a daughter. He screams at her that she has to start being honest with him. Not just as if her life depended on it, but his as well. Juliet's kind of dismissive of it and tries to walk away, but Paul keeps harping on it until finally Juliet says, okay, if you want to be honest, your hand shakes. You've been hiding it. You have the syndrome and you haven't reported that. And isn't that a part of the pact? And according to the pact, because you have the syndrome, you are completely unqualified to have this job. You shouldn't be anywhere near a firearm. Paul doesn't deny it. He just wants honesty from Juliet. And she doesn't seem willing to give it. So finally, he just goes home. Juliet heads home a little while later, and as she's going to her apartment, she once again sees Lucas in the cafeteria by himself. The stars aren't out, so she's a little curious as to why Lucas is even there, and he says it's because he was waiting to see her. There's heavy flirtation going on. When Juliet eventually gets to her apartment, she can't sleep. The thought about George cheating on her is just too much. She needs some advice, and she radios Martha. She's ready to give up. She's ready to give up the badge, because the whole reason she showed up and took the job was to find out who killed George. But George turned out to be a lying cheat. And she doesn't care anymore who killed him. She just feels betrayed. Martha, though, convinces her to stick with it. She gives her a little bit of a pep talk, reminding her that it speaks volumes if Juliet were to give up all because she found out some unsettling news about George. After this little pep talk, Juliet is remotivated and she decides to go visit Regina again, this time without Paul. She confronts Regina saying, "You're the rat who gave up George to Judicial. You told them about the hard drive. It's because of you that George is dead. You talked to them." And Regina says, No, it's not Judicial I talked to. No, Judicial comes during the day. They ask the easy questions. But the man who knows everything, he comes at night. He was standing at the foot of my bed. He repeated every single person I talked to that day. This shocks Juliet, but before she can ask any questions, Regina starts putting on a fan to drown out any noise that were to take place because she tells Juliet they can hear us. Once there is noise drowning out their conversation, Juliet asks her, "Who are you talking about?" But Regina never answers, just telling Juliet that every name that Regina gave this person was another day her mom didn't have to spend in the mines. So yeah, she gave up quite a few names. Juliet asks Regina what was on the hard drive, but Regina tells her, "I have no idea. I never saw it." She traded George the hard drive for something that she's kept, and it's incredible. She walks over to her rug, and it was hidden inside. It's a book. The book's been passed down for generations in George's family. And when Regina hands it over, she tells Juliet, "This will get you killed." When Juliet gets back to her apartment and looks at it, she realizes why. The book is a Georgia travel guide from pre-rebellion. It's a kid's book with a bunch of pictures. Visuals that shock Juliet because it's colors and shapes and trees and rivers, stuff she has never seen. Stuff that's so shocking, she's having trouble processing it. But what Juliet doesn't know is that Judicial is watching her read this book. Because Judicial has a hidden camera in Juliet's apartment. And the two agents that are watching this decide that they have to wake up Sims. He has to see this. In episode 7, as Juliet looks through the book, right in the front of it, there's a bunch of names written down, and one of them catches her eye. It's the name Gloria. She recognized the name, and when she goes over to the files that she found, sure enough, there is a Gloria. Now, she's never met Gloria, but it is interesting that she's here in the files, and she was interviewed by Judicial. She decides to pack up all the files, including the book, keep it on her, and head out, which is a smart move, because at this point, Sims has gotten to Judicial headquarters, and he's watching her. He doesn't want to act, though. He wants to just keep following her, see where she leads them. When Juliet gets to her office, she looks up Gloria, only to find that Gloria is now in long-term care over in medical. A short time after finding this out, Paul shows up. He starts giving Juliet all the messages that she missed, and one of them is from maintenance, apologizing because they broke her vase when they showed up. And Juliet can't figure out what maintenance was doing.
She didn't request anything, so why were they in her apartment in the first place? She questions Paul on it, but Paul says, I don't know how they do things in the down deep, but up here, you learn pretty quickly not to question what maintenance does, or else your toilet doesn't work. And down in the down deep, they're just fix it themselves, so they question everything. The next message she has is from the mayor telling her that he wants to meet with her first thing in the morning, but she brushes it off, telling Paul that she has to do something in the mids, and she'll have to reschedule. When she does head out, she turns her radio off. The thing she has to do is go meet with Gloria. Gloria isn't supposed to have any visitors, but Juliet's badge gets her in the door, and Juliet finds out why Gloria isn't supposed to have any visitors. It's because Gloria has been drugged up for the past 3 years. She's completely unresponsive. She doesn't even know what's going on around her. In her mind, she's on the beach with family. In reality, she's useless. Juliet recognizes this pretty quickly, so she leaves. She knows that if she actually does want to talk to Gloria and find out information, she can't have her in this kind of state. But in order to get her out of that state, she needs clearance from the judge. So she heads to Judge Meadows' office only to find out that Judge Meadows is out that day. She's sick. When Juliet eventually arrives back in her office, it's chaos. Because there was a fight that broke out near one of the bars. It was an absolute shit show, and Juliet was nowhere to be found, even though they were radioing her. It was up to Paul to kind of manage things, and they didn't have a lot on staff. So when Juliet shows up and sees what's going on, Paul grabs her and takes her into her office and starts yelling at her. He's pissed because he knows that the people need a sheriff, and right now they're not getting one. On top of it, he was forced to lie for her when the mayor asked why she didn't show for their meeting. He's completely fed up and demands some answers. So Juliet tells him that George Wilkins was murdered. Just like Marnes, the mayor, and even Doug. She then gets a little emotional while looking at Paul and says, the truth is, I don't know what I'm doing. I came up here to find out who killed George. And the only thing I've learned so far is the fact that the guy I loved used me. But yet, for some reason, I still want to find out what happened to him. I know it's all connected to the other murders and why Holston went out and why his wife went out. So what I need from you is to look the other way as I look into 4 murders and 2 cleanings. Wanting to help, Paul tells her that because they found one of George's relics in Doug's apartment, and that led to opening up a case, it could also lead to reopening George's case. Right before he leaves the office, Juliet asks him, do you know where Meadows lives? And he gives her the address. She's planning on visiting with Meadows the next day. But that night, she decides to pay a visit to her new friend, Lucas. She's actually the first one there. She beats him to watching the stars. And they get to chatting about what Lucas does. He actually works in IT. He knows Bernard, kind of. They then start talking about the stars in the sky and what it all could mean. And Lucas takes that as a sign that he should lean in to kiss Juliet. It's not a good sign because she pulls back, it makes things awkward, and she leaves, and Lucas feels weird. But one of the reasons she is more involved in looking at astrology now is because in that book that she was given, there's a whole section on it about what the stars mean, different constellations. So now at least she kind of has something to go on. The next day, before she goes and visits the judge, she has to go and meet with the mayor. He wanted to meet with her because there's been a threat against him. Not really against his life per se, but you could read it like that. Bernard tells Juliet that after he intervened on Juliet's behalf in the meeting with Sims and Meadows, Meadows didn't like it. So Meadows told Sims that if Bernard were to obstruct in her actions, then she would use some kind of contortion of the pact to remove him. What he's worried about is Meadows possibly hijacking the servers. Coming from IT, Bernard knows what someone could do if they in fact did that, how much power they would have. So what he wants is to find something, along with Juliet's help, to wall the mayor in so she doesn't step outside of her lane. Juliet jumps right into action. After this meeting, she goes and visits with Meadows, and she finds that Meadows is in fact sick and in no mood for visitors, but Juliet doesn't give her an option. She demands to know why Gloria is in this quasi-vegetative state. And at first, the judge doesn't even recognize her name. But when she gets a description of Gloria, she goes, oh, yeah, her. It's for her own good. Juliet accuses Meadows of drugging Gloria because she feels like Gloria told Allison Becker something that made her want to go outside. The judge can't figure out exactly why Juliet would even want to talk to Gloria, and truthfully doesn't really care. She even goes so far as to say, "Juliet, I'm not stopping you from talking to Gloria." And that's when Juliet points out, "You're not, but you're prohibiting me from talking to her with a sound mind." Juliet wants answers so badly that she offers Meadows a deal. "If you let me talk to Gloria, not drugged up, then by the end of the week I'll turn in my badge." Meadows looks at Juliet and tells her, "I can't lift the order, and there isn't anything that I can do about it. You need to stop doing whatever you're doing." Juliet shoots back, "I'm not stopping until I find out what I want to know." And Meadows says, "They'll never let you." That really perks up Juliet's ears a bit. She starts questioning Meadows on who is they, but Meadows refuses to answer, telling her just to get out. It's at that moment that Juliet realizes Meadows isn't in power. She's nothing more than a puppet. And that puppet was being watched by possibly the puppet master, because Sims also had a hidden camera in Meadows' apartment, so he saw the whole conversation. When Sims heard that Juliet had visited Gloria in medical, he wanted to see the replayed footage. The problem is, there's a vase full of flowers blocking the camera, so Sims can't see what they're talking about. As Sims tries to dig into what Juliet is onto, Juliet was trying to get help with this whole Gloria situation, and the only person she could think of was her dad. She explains to her dad that she needs to talk to Gloria. She's being drugged against her will, and she needs the drugs to wear off in order to get some answers. Even though this is extremely dangerous and her dad warns her against it, ultimately her dad gives in, not only helping Juliet, but also getting Gloria out of medical into a more secure location, his office. When they do get there, though, Gloria is still in a really, really bad state. Knowing that they don't have a whole lot of time, the doctor does give her something to get her out of this state, and it gets a little dicey, but a short while later, she does come out of it. Juliet right away starts to try to explain to Gloria where she is, who Juliet is, and why Juliet needs to talk to her. Before Gloria can even talk, she gets weirded out because she sees Dr. Nichols show up, and she recognizes him as the guy who wouldn't let her have children. Juliet is shocked by these allegations, but she can't even focus on them because she needs to get the answers from Gloria, so she kicks her dad out of the room. Gloria's mood finally changes when Juliet pulls the book out, and that is something that really jogs Gloria's memory. Gloria explains to Juliet that she gave the book to George's mother, and George's mother was one of us. Juliet doesn't know who us is, and Gloria asks her, "Have you ever heard of the Flame Keepers?" Juliet hasn't, and Gloria says, "Yeah, that's because they erased us. The Silo's been doing it ever since the rebellion. They put something in the water to have our memories fade. They wanted to erase the past and anybody who tried to preserve it. But the Flame Keepers were the people who fought back and kept things, just like this book. I was one of them until they put our flame out. They wanted us to die off so much that they would make us think we had a chance at having a baby, and they would never take our birth control out." They then hear a baby crying, and Gloria asks to hold it, and Juliet agrees. As Gloria's holding this tiny baby, she realizes that she knows Juliet, at least a little bit. She knows her mother. While Juliet's mom wasn't officially a flame keeper, she definitely shared the same curiosity. In fact, George's mom was helping Juliet's mom build a magnifying device, one that would have been highly illegal. Gloria goes on to say, "When I found out what happened to your mom, I really felt like we lost one of our own." It's gotten to the point, though, where Juliet has to take Gloria back to medical. Before she does that, she has an intense conversation with her dad about why her dad would go along with not taking birth control out of people who won the lottery. Her dad pleads ignorance. He tells Juliet that he didn't have a say in it. They lied to him. They told him that by not taking the birth control out, he was helping to prevent genetic disease from running rampant. It was nothing about killing off nonconformists. None of that is good enough for Juliet, so she just escorts Gloria back to medical. When she does that, though, she's seen on judicial's cameras. Now that Sims knows where they are, he wants to know where they came from. As Sims looks into it, Gloria asks Juliet to see the book one more time. After flipping through it, Gloria notices that her flowers are gone, the ones that were in front of the mirror. This jogs a memory of Sheriff Holston coming over to her place. He's the one who brought the flowers and put them in front of the mirror. And that's when Juliet remembers the note that Holston left her about the mirrors. And she realizes that those mirrors probably go two ways. She tells Gloria that she's pretty sure they have a camera behind the mirror. That's why Holston put the flowers there. Juliet knows she needs to get out of there because if this is true, then it's only a matter of time before Judicial shows up. But right before she leaves, she asks Gloria if Holston did anything else. And Gloria says he spent most of the time over there in the vent. When Juliet goes over and pops off the vent, she finds the drive. All of this is being watched by Sims and Judicial. They know they need to move quickly in order to get that drive from Juliet. Juliet turns to go, but Gloria grabs her and says, "You're the last Flamekeeper. You didn't ask for this, but now it's all on you. If this dies with you, then it dies for everybody." Juliet starts shaking her head, but Gloria says, "What would your mother think? I mean, did you ever ask why she killed herself?" And that's probably a question that Juliet's asked over and over again. But Juliet also needs to get the hell out of there, and she does. And when Judicial shows up, Juliet is long gone. In episode 8, Sims arrives at Gloria's bedside just after Juliet escaped. Sims actually has a really good relationship with Gloria, because the only reason Sims has a son is because of Gloria. Him and his wife were having trouble conceiving a child until Gloria stepped in and helped. Because of that, he's willing to give her a little bit of a longer leash. He asks Gloria, what did Juliet Nichols pull out of that vent? And she tells him that it was a bag, one that Sheriff Holston hid there. We don't know how the rest of the conversation went, but you get the idea that Gloria did tell Sims there was a drive in the bag. As for where Juliet is, she went to go hide in her dad's office. She tried using the computer in her dad's office to access the drive, but she was unable to. You need a special computer to do that. The good thing is that office doesn't have secret cameras. So as Sims and the rest of Judicial try their hardest to locate where Juliet is, for the time being, she's incognito. She ends up falling asleep in the office and only waking up when she hears the radio go off and her name being called. It's Paul, who tells her that she needs to come to the office ASAP, and once she gets there, it's Judicial tearing the office apart, looking for the drive. Billings is pissed. He feels like that when Juliet went to go visit Meadows, she must have done something that led Meadows to ordering this search. But he's also pissed at Judicial, because this search is a blatant violation of the pact. Law enforcement premises can't be searched without extreme probable cause, and he feels like they don't have it. They completely ignore Paul's request to stop, continuing to search, but their search is coming up empty. They even go as far as to search Juliet's bag that's on her, but that doesn't have the drive in it either. She stashed it somewhere. Once Judicial finally leaves, pretty empty-handed, mind you, Paul and Juliet head into Juliet's office, and they both think the same thing. This doesn't feel random, it feels more personal. Juliet tells Paul that even though the warrant says Meadows, she didn't do this. When she was talking to Meadows privately, she could tell that Meadows wasn't the one calling the shots. And the person that she believes is calling the shots is Sims. All of it makes a lot of sense. Sims has never liked her and has been wanting to get rid of her since she arrived. Paul isn't so sure, but Juliet is very confident. There's a little bit of a lull in the conversation, and then Juliet remembers something that Paul said, that whole seizure was illegal. And Paul says, yeah, absolutely it was. They skipped about 10 steps. So Juliet gets a wild idea to go and arrest Sims. She storms into his office, interrupting a conversation with one of the agents who actually searched them. Sims was in the middle of yelling at him for not coming up with the drive. Neither Paul or Juliet hear that part of the conversation, though, because they were storming in. But Juliet tells Paul to take Sims into custody. And Paul, knowing the pact like the back of his hand, starts reciting exactly the law that Sims broke. Sims feels like this is a joke. It's only a matter of time before he's out. He doesn't really take it all that serious. But he is a little surprised that Paul would do something like this. They did work together for a long, long time. But Paul isn't loyal to his friends. Paul is loyal to the pact. Billings takes Sims away, and that leaves Sims' office all to Juliet. Juliet starts looking through some filing cabinets of Sims, and then she finds a secret compartment with a couple of files. And one of those files was her mother's. The file goes into the magnifying device that her mother built, the one that Judicial found and ultimately destroyed. It's something that Juliet's dad did not want her mom to build. So after reading the file, Juliet headed to go visit her dad and ask, why didn't you want my mom to build that magnifying device? He kind of dismisses it because Juliet's had strong feelings in the past, but Juliet says, no, this time I want to know why she killed herself. I wasn't willing to listen before, but I am now. He goes on to tell her that after they lost Juliet's brother, he kind of went inward. He devoted his life to his career, which wasn't the smart thing, while Juliet's mother pushed out. She wanted to get answers. She wanted to help people and make sure that what happened to them never happened to any other family. She didn't care about rules. That's why she made the magnifying device. And then one day, Judicial came in and destroyed it. Juliet's father has a lot of regrets in this situation. He regrets not doing something, not pushing back on Judicial, because ultimately it led to Juliet's mom being in a dark, dark place. After that moment, she was never the same again. Juliet mentions how her mother thought he had reported her, and honestly, Juliet did too. But after reading her mother's file, Juliet knows that Judicial was watching her mother with sensors through mirrors. Juliet apologizes to her dad for believing that he was the one who turned her mother in, gives him a hug, but then they get interrupted by one of the nurses who tells the doctor that maintenance is there to check something with the vents. And he didn't put in a maintenance request. Once the nurse leaves after they tell the guy to come back, Juliet says that maintenance guy is here to put one of those listening devices in here because this is a dead spot for them. So they're going to put a camera, they're going to put a listening device, they're going to put something that monitors what goes on in this room. She then goes and retrieves the hard drive that she stashed there earlier because she needs to find out exactly what's on it. Right before she leaves, she tells her dad, can you let Martha know that I'm coming down there? I should be there by 6 p.m. Juliet, however, doesn't make it by 6, and by 7, Martha gets really, really concerned. But Juliet just got held up on the steps. Judicial has put in checkpoints, making sure that people with relics don't get anywhere. That forces Juliet into hiding a bit. She's not quite sure what she's going to do, so she sends a note to Lucas asking him if he can stop by. With Lucas working in IT, Juliet figured that he might be able to help with freeing up the drive. After hearing the kind of restrictions that are on this drive in order to access it, Lucas tells her that she needs to take it to her work computer. The problem is she can't go there. And she asks Lucas if there's any way he can work around it, but he's hesitant to do that. And she begs him, saying, please, I think this drive has the answers to a lot of questions, like why Marnes and the mayor and George were killed. And that comes as news to him because Marnes and the mayor being killed, that wasn't in the papers. The story that they were told was they just died of natural causes. Lucas, though, is still hesitant to help her, and she says, come on, you should be the one who wants to help me. You sit in the cafeteria every night looking and wondering what's out there. What if the answers to your questions are on this drive? He still doesn't want to help, and he starts talking about rules. And that's when Juliet bashes her mirror, exposing the hidden camera that was there, the one that Judicial watches her on. Just like Juliet's dad, Lucas had no idea that these cameras even existed. It's a real shocking moment for him. But even though it's shocking, it still doesn't work. Lucas doesn't want to risk getting in trouble because he's the only one taking care of his mother at the moment. And at that point, Juliet can't sit there and argue with him anymore. After smashing the mirror, she knows it's only a matter of time before Judicial shows up looking for her. So she gets out of there. And that ends up being a pretty smart call because a short while later, Judicial does show up at her doorstep, but she's nowhere to be found. Juliet heads down the silo, quickly trying to get to Martha, but she's stopped. She tries pulling the "I'm the sheriff, let me through," but that still doesn't work. That is until Bernard backs her up on it and commands Judicial Security to step down. Bernard came looking for her because she arrested Sims. He wants to know why. And she says, you were right. Judicial is planning a takeover, but Meadows is not the one behind it. It's Sims. He doesn't want to have this conversation in public, so they head to a cornfield. When they get in the middle of it, Juliet backs up her previous statement that Sims is actually the one calling the shots. Bernard kind of shakes his head and then asks Juliet, what are they searching for? I mean, they tore your apartment up. Now there's checkpoints. What do you have that's so threatening? Juliet just plays dumb, saying, I have no idea what you're talking about. And Bernard says, come on, Juliet, the clock is ticking. So if you have the hard drive, then... But he catches himself. He realizes that he just showed his hand. He accidentally said hard drive. He wasn't supposed to do that. And now Juliet is super suspicious of how Bernard knows that she had a hard drive. Juliet turns to run, but she runs right into Sims. It's at this moment that Juliet realizes it was actually Bernard who was the one calling the shots, and it was Bernard who had Marnes and the previous mayor killed. Juliet is in shock, and then she hears Bernard say, I'm sorry, Sheriff Nichols, did you say you want to go outside? I heard that, right? And Sims backs him up on this false claim. Juliet is even more surprised and asks him, why would you do this? And Bernard says, because the needs of many outweigh the lives of a few, and that hard drive threatens the lives of everyone in the silo. And you are the greatest threat to the silo in 140 years. Judicial police then show up and Juliet takes off running, but a short while later she's caught and captured. As the police, which by the way includes Billings, escort Juliet back upstairs, Juliet pleads her case to Paul. But it's hard to plead the case when Sims and Bernard are sitting there saying, no, she definitely said she wants to go outside. Juliet gets a break, though, when Paul, who is the one escorting her, his hands start shaking. Juliet knocks into him, grabs the bag from Sims that contains the hard drive, and then jumps over the edge of the silo. In episode 9, Juliet doesn't fall all the way down to the down deep. She actually just falls one story down. But it still hurts. Luckily, though, she is able to escape. Because of how it all went down, though, Sims thinks that Paul might have let her get away, even though that's not actually the case. Because she was able to escape, Bernard is freaking out a little bit. He wants to find her immediately. And Sims is already on it. He's searching every apartment, but she's not popping up. In order to make sure that they do find Juliet, they're going to be talking to everybody. Juliet's family, her friends. Sims goes and talks to Juliet's father, but he doesn't know. And he basically tells Sims that even if he did know, he wouldn't help him. A couple of other people from Judicial head down to the down deep and talk to Martha, but she doesn't know either, and she claims she's got nothing to hide. And news of Juliet proclaiming that she wanted to go outside has reached the down deep. Martha certainly doesn't believe it. So far, Judicial's coming up empty. So, where is Juliet? Well, Sims maybe should have went home, because Juliet has broken into his house. And when his wife and son show up for the day, she's hiding inside. Sims thought this might be the case, so he did send some people from Judicial to look after his family, but Sims' wife told them to go away. She immediately, though, regretted that decision when she walked in and noticed that somebody had been inside. In order to protect her son, she locked him away in a room as she slowly made her way through the apartment with a gun looking for the intruder. Juliet was still able to get the jump on her. Juliet then escorted her over to a pole and handcuffed her to it. Sims' son was in another room the entire time, but he could see what was going on from a crack. Juliet, though, didn't want to hurt Sims' wife. All she wanted was to use Sims' computer, because she knew she couldn't use her own computer to access the drive, but Sims would absolutely have that capability. He would have permission. So she hooks up the drive and she waits for it to load up. While Juliet was trying to load up the drive, the new sheriff, Billings, went to Juliet's apartment, where Judicial police were already raiding it and trying to look for any signs of where she might have went. When Billings shows up, they don't want to allow him inside, at Sims' orders, even though Paul has a right to do so through the pact. Paul's relationship, though, with Judicial ends up benefiting him, because he kind of knows the girl that's stopping him, and she whispers to him that there was really nothing left. The place was a complete mess. Paul leaves Juliet's apartment, but he is planning on returning once Judicial is gone. At this point, Judicial does have one lead. They found out that Juliet sent a message to somebody in the cafeteria, and they know that that person was Lucas. Bernard sits Lucas down and tells him exactly what he knows happened. That Lucas went to Juliet's apartment, she showed him the broken mirror, she showed him what was behind it, and most importantly, she showed him the hard drive. He threatens Lucas with all the things that Lucas didn't do, i.e. informing Judicial about what she had. And it's pretty serious. He's threatening to send him outside. The issue is Lucas doesn't know anything. The only thing he knows is that on the drive there was the number 18 written on it. Coincidentally, Bernard has a little keychain with the number 18 on it that at times blinks, buzzes, and flashes red. That number, though, is big. It actually does give Bernard a lead. He's able to go into Judicial security and tell them to look for the hard drive with the number 18 on it, so they start looking. While Bernard and Judicial are trying to find the hard drive, Paul Billings has made his way back into Juliet's apartment, and he's able to snoop around. The first thing you notice is a little piece of the broken mirror, the two-way mirror. But then he's able to locate the book, and it shocks him. He flips through it, seeing pictures and colors he never saw before, but he realizes he needs to destroy it. He tears one piece of the book out and then puts the rest of it in the oven, turning it on and letting the oven do the work. He heads back to the office, and then he just stares at it. That office obviously used to belong to Juliet, who finally, after a short while, has opened up the drive and starts flipping through it. The first thing she finds is a file that says "Start Here," and when she opens it, she's shocked because it's a video file of George. And that is something that they didn't even know could happen. They didn't know that anyone in the silo had the capability to record themselves and put it on a drive like this. Juliet is mesmerized by it, and so is Sims's wife, who was able to escape at this point. She is so shocked by it that she stops trying to attack Juliet, arrest her, and all that. Because they both are kind of just listening to George say that what is on that drive is, quote, the truth. At this point, Sim's wife has a hammer, and she also has the gun. She could attack Juliet, but instead of doing any of that, Sim's wife tips off Juliet, saying the second you connect to that drive, they know where you are. So you can either run with it, or you can continue to watch this, and they're going to catch you. And Sims's wife is correct. As soon as Juliet plugged in the drive, Judicial was able to locate drive 18. And when they said the floor, Sims knew right away where Juliet was. So he headed straight for his apartment. When he arrived, though, with a bunch of security, Juliet was nowhere to be found. When Sims gets his wife alone, she does admit to him that she let Juliet go. She was a former raider. She knows that former raiders don't always abide by the rules. She wasn't about to let a firefight break out in her apartment with their son in another room. Now Sims and Bernard are back to looking for Juliet. Juliet, not having many allies, decided to go to one close by, Patrick. She promised him the watch that George gave her in return for his help. George knew a really good IT guy that he thought could help with this situation. When the IT guy arrives, he's a little freaked out because it is the former sheriff, but then they explain to him that she needs a computer with a certain type of access, and a hacker like him would know how to do that. And he does. Not only is he able to open up the drive, he's able to bounce the signal to another floor. That way, Judicial thinks that he's on floor 135 when he's actually on floor 60, let's say. Juliet picks up right where she left off, and it's that message from George. It gets a little personal, so Patrick and this IT wizard kind of let Juliet sit there and watch it. And George tells her once again that the drive is full of the truth, but also that, yes, he was planning on just using her. And then this crazy thing happened, he fell in love. He then goes on to say that he found that door that he had been looking for, and it's huge. He couldn't get through it. He figures maybe Juliet can. And as far as the water, he simply says it was nothing to worry about. Right before the video ends, he tells Juliet to look for the file that says Jane Carmody cleaning. That is the whole reason why Allison and the sheriff went out to clean. He wraps up the video by telling her that he loves her, and then the video ends. She starts to wipe away tears, but then she remembers what George said about that Jane Carmody file. She opens it up, and she is shocked at what she sees. It's green grass, it's blue sky, it's trees, it's stuff she's never seen before. She calls over Patrick and this IT hacker, and they also are shocked because the three of them know that this development is huge. And in the season finale, as soon as it kind of settles in about what they're watching, Juliet jumps into action saying everybody needs to see this. The issue is all of the TVs and monitors are controlled by IT. Now, this hacker tells Juliet that they can get into them. They can hack in, but that's going to take traveling through 30 levels. Neither Patrick or the hacker really want to help Juliet out, but they also know that they need to get the hell out of the apartment because Judicial is coming. And the way that Juliet is going to travel through the silo isn't through the steps. They're going to have checkpoints and people looking for her. The way that she does it is through the recycling chute. They have to dodge some items, but it works. They're able to get to the lower level without being detected. While Juliet was making her way down to the lower level, Bernard and Sims are just staring at a bunch of monitors, hoping that she shows up on them. And that's when Sims gets a note that Paul Billings had gone to Juliet's apartment. And that was something that Sims told Paul not to do. So he leaves the monitor room to go find Paul, and he scolds him for not obeying the order, but then he asks him, did you find any hints about where she might have went? And Paul says, no, I didn't. Sims then gets really agitated. The more he's speaking, the more his tone goes up, because he wants revenge for what Juliet did, sneaking in his apartment and kind of terrorizing his wife and son. At least that's the way he sees it. There might be no one in the silo looking for Juliet more than Sims. Sims calms down a little bit, and he reveals to Paul that he knows Paul has the syndrome, which has been worrying Paul this entire time, the fact that someone would know who could actually do something. And Sims is that person, but what Sims tells Paul is that he's willing to grant him an exemption. That's a big relief to Paul. When Sims gets back to Bernard and the monitor room, they know where Juliet is. She's popped up on the screen, and they can see that the hacker and Patrick are there, and the hacker is trying to do something with the IT computers. But then they all see what the hacker was doing, because the picture of the tree and the green grass and the blue sky, it all pops up on the monitors, and Bernard freaks out. He tells everybody to cover their eyes, look away, and that includes Sims. He then frantically goes into IT mode to get that picture off of all the TVs. It was only up there for maybe a minute, but everybody who saw it was pretty damn surprised. When the signal gets shut down, that's when Juliet, Patrick, and the hacker go their separate ways. They know it's only a matter of time before Judicial finds them at this point. The problem is, Judicial can't find her because she's using the recycling chute. And both Bernard and Sims can't figure out how Juliet keeps escaping them, especially with the security that they have. And that is when it dawns on Bernard that she must be in the recycling chute. That's the only place where they don't have cameras. It makes the most sense. Sims radios to the sheriff's department to go take a look, and sure enough, Juliet is there. And Judicial has ordered the sheriff's unit to knock her out of the chute. At first, they just throw simple items down. Items that would hurt you, no doubt, but you probably wouldn't die from. But that's when they make sure that they're going to knock her out, by pushing this giant metal unit that if it hits Juliet, she is done for. Juliet is even scared of this thing. She's shocked when she sees it being pushed over the edge. So in an attempt to save her life, she decides to drop, falling all the way down to the down deep, landing on a bunch of recycling. But luckily for her, when she landed, the people in the recycling room jumped to action, grabbing her and narrowly saving her life before that giant item landed right on top of her. Juliet's injured, she's knocked out, but she is amongst her people. People like Martha and Shirley, they're there to make sure that she's going to be okay, and they're ready to defend her if Judicial comes. But they're pretty surprised when Knox shows up and reveals that he tipped off Judicial that Juliet's down there. Initially, they're pretty pissed off at him, but he explains that it's for the best. Juliet being down there put the entire Down Deep at risk. And even Juliet says he's right. It is for the best. Juliet asks Knox for a minute so that she can tell Martha some of the things that she's discovered, but they don't get that because when Sims shows up, along with Bernard and a couple of Judicial police, they jump right into action. They're not willing to give Juliet any extra time, especially Sims, who wants to kill her. Juliet and Sims both get into a shouting match because Sims feels like his family was traumatized, and Juliet reminds him that he does that every day to families. That's literally his job. All Bernard cares about, though, is finding the drive, and he does that in Juliet's bag. First thing he does is smash it to pieces. The way Bernard sees it is that if Juliet did what she wanted to, she would have put everybody in the silo in danger. Juliet says people can handle the truth, but Bernard doesn't see it like that. He then makes Juliet an offer. She waives her right to a hearing, and she stopped claiming that she didn't want to go outside, and in return, nobody in the Down Deep will pay the price for harboring a fugitive. It's too good of an offer for Juliet to pass up. She doesn't want to put her friends at risk, so she agrees. Bernard, Sims, and the rest of Judicial then parade Juliet up the steps of the silo, and everybody can see. Two people, though, that have no interest in watching this are Martha and Shirley. Shirley is still pissed off at what Knox did. She also feels like she should have talked Juliet out of going after that Heat tape when theirs ran out, because she feels like going after that Heat tape is what pissed Bernard off. That thing, though, about the Heat tape, it sticks with Martha. She does something she hasn't done in about 25 years. She steps foot out of her apartment because she has to go pay somebody a visit. It's a woman named Carla, and she works in supply. Supply is in charge of that Heat tape. And the more that Martha thought about it, the more it didn't make sense, because the Heat tape that they have down in mechanical is way better than the Heat tape they have up in supply. So why in the world would Bernard even care about stealing a box of the crappy Heat tape? So what Martha asked Carla to do is switch out the Heat tape. Put the Heat tape from mechanical, the better Heat tape, in the box that is going to be used to make the suit that Juliet's going to wear when she steps outside. That way, Juliet's not wearing that suit that's made of the crappy Heat tape. Martha has no idea if this will work or not, but hey, it's worth a shot, and it's her way of trying to help her friend out. As Martha was trying to intervene, Juliet was getting the shock of her lifetime. Bernard and Sims escort her to the monitor room. It's in the janitor's closet. It's hidden. You press a button, there's a secret door. You go down, and sure enough, there is all the judicial monitors. The reason that Bernard brought her there wasn't just to show her this, but also because he wanted her to see what happened to George. It turns out no one killed George. Doug Trumbull was taking George in, and he realized that he would probably be tortured. So he decided to jump on his own. He knew what he was doing. It's really, really tough for Juliet to watch it, but there's the proof she needs, and she finally gets her answer. She then has to go and get fitted for a suit. While she waits to go outside, she gets some visitors. The first one's her dad. She apologizes to her dad for how she's treated him for all these years, but he doesn't care about that. He just wants to know why she wants to go outside. She doesn't really answer the question, though. She wants to tell him, but she can't. The next person to come visit Juliet is Shirley, although her visit has an ulterior motive. She brings Juliet some food from the Down Deep, but in that food is hidden a secret message. There's a note from Martha that says, "You wanted the truth. The truth is I love you. Have no fear. They're good in supply." Juliet has no idea what that means, but she just kind of files it away and waits. She has to wait for Bernard, who, before he's going to give Juliet that whole spiel about wanting to go outside, he has to visit with Lucas. He appreciates Lucas's information, but it doesn't mean Lucas isn't being punished. He's not going to have to go out and clean, but he is going to go to the mines for 10 years. When he wraps up his meeting with a very shocked Lucas, he heads down to the prison to have a one-on-one conversation with Juliet before they do the whole ceremony. He tells her, "You once asked me when your trouble started, and I know you think it's when you stole the tape, but no, your trouble started at conception. Your parents were never supposed to have kids, but accidents happen. Surprisingly, though, you became useful to the silo, but then you became sheriff, you started looking into the death of George Wilkins, and you became a mortal threat to the silo." She starts shaking her head and says if that means that this led to the death of Marnes, the mayor, the former sheriff, his wife, if it led to the death of all of them, then I don't want to be a part of the silo anymore. He explains that adjustments have to be made, and when Allison and George open up that file, he had to adjust, because opening up that file and really opening up the hard drive as a whole put everybody in danger. Juliet right away asks if her mother was one of those adjustments, but he says no, that was her choice. She yells at him, "You know the display is fake. I mean, why not tell people the truth? I mean, you have that massive door that George found in the silo, deep down. Why don't you tell the people about that?" By the look on his face, though, it seems like there's a chance Bernard had no idea about that door. But instead of acknowledging it, he just says, "The founders left us with many mysteries." He then tells Juliet it's time to get dressed. She does have one request. She wants to take the sheriff badge that used to belong to Holston. She wants to take it with her and go outside. And Bernard grants the request. They get her dressed, and everybody waits to see if Juliet Nichols will go outside and clean. The group in the Down Deep especially is invested in this one. But what they never expected was that Martha would show up to watch. I mean, the seas part. She has a lot of respect down there. A little while later, they see Juliet on their screen, and when Juliet steps outside, she sees exactly what Holston saw, what Allison saw, a tree, green grass, blue sky, the works. She walks over to the camera, but unlike them, she doesn't clean. She pulls the rag out and then she drops it, which is something that no one has ever done before. It's shocking. Bernard and Sims aren't really worried about it. They both say to themselves it's only a matter of time before she drops dead. So they're just watching Juliet walk up the same hill that Allison and Holston walked up. And then Juliet trips. Both Bernard and Sims think that this is the moment where she dies, just like Allison and the sheriff. But Juliet starts feeling around on the ground. She can't see anything, but she feels something. And then she puts her hand down and she notices that her hand is going through an image of a rock. All of it's fake because she can feel somebody's body. She casually takes out the sheriff's badge and places it down on that body, thinking that it's Holston. Everybody's watching in surprise, but Bernard just says she knows. And then he makes a beeline for the IT computers. As he runs off, Juliet does the unthinkable. She stands back up. She starts making her way up the hill, which no one's ever done before. They never made it this far. Luckily for Juliet, the good heat tape is working. It's keeping her safe. At the point that she reaches the top of the hill, Bernard has made his way to the servers. He used that special 18 key to get in, and while we don't know if he had a hand in it, all of a sudden the display on Juliet's face mask completely changes. It goes from this picturesque scene to the drab and dilapidated visual that everybody in the silo has. When she turns around, it's just a desolate wasteland. When she looks in front of her, it's the same. But she keeps on walking. What she might not realize at the time, though, is that silo is one of probably about 100 silos. And in the way distance, looks like a city.
Now, Season 2 picks up right where Season 1 left off, with Juliet outside of the silo and seeing the bleak landscape with a bunch of other silos in the distance. She starts to make her way towards the closest silo to her, and she sees dead bodies strewn across the area. And that's because this silo also had an uprising, just like the silo that Juliet came from. Although this uprising was successful. The people made it out of the silo, and they found out that the air was still toxic, and they all quickly died a probably painful death. It's hard to tell how long ago this happened, but Juliet is looking around at all these bodies, just trying to make her way towards the entrance of this particular silo, and she does so. Even when she reaches the entrance of the silo, the dead bodies don't stop. There are skeletons going all the way down the stairwell. It's not exactly easy for Juliet to get in this silo. It takes a lot of hard work. She has to pry the door open, but she is able to get in, and what she sees is the fact that this silo appears to be absolutely abandoned, no forms of life. Unfortunately, while she was trying to pry her way in, some of the tape on her suit came loose, and she starts to freak out a little bit. As she runs around this silo trying to get the proper tools that would allow her to fix the suit, she's running by spray-painted walls that just say lies. And then, as she's trying to make her way down to mechanical to get the good tape, her suit runs out of air. It forces her to take off her helmet. The thing is, her helmet isn't coming off, and it forces her to actually take her entire suit off. So now she's stuck in this silo that appears to be abandoned. Her suit is completely ruined, and she can't leave the silo unless she finds another suit, along with the good tape. With nothing else to do, she starts looking around this silo for any signs of maybe what happened, but also anything that could help her get out of it. Whatever happened in this silo didn't happen recently, that's for sure. You've got overgrown plants taking over walls and whatnot, so this particular uprising probably happened well over a year ago at least. This silo, though, appears to be set up just like Juliet's silo, right down to the hidden cameras. Shortly after discovering that, Juliet is able to find a uniform that she can wear for the time being. All the while, though, Juliet is trying to make her way down to mechanical. And as she's doing this, she's getting flashbacks from her childhood growing up in mechanical, getting acclimated to working and living in mechanical, and really getting her new life with Walker. After all, Walker taught her a lot and was a real mentor to her. As Juliet, though, continues to make her way down the stairs, all while doing a trip down memory lane, she hears this pinging. It really sounds like a tick, like a high-pitched clock, if you will. But when she gets down to that particular floor, the walkway that would allow her to get to wherever this sound is going was taken out by something. So she's going to have to find a way over to it. and that's not going to be easy. When she looks up at her surroundings, she does have a little bit of luck. A couple of bodies were hung on the stairwell, and she's going to use the rope and see if she can maybe swing across to the other side. Unfortunately, though, that doesn't work. Not only does it not work, but the rope snaps and she ends up falling. The good news, though, is that this silo, well, the pumps don't work anymore, so she didn't fall too far before she hit water, and she's able to survive. She's just frustrated, and she's looking like a drowned rat as she makes her way back to the stairwell and tries to recollect herself to figure out a way over to the other side of this. Before she can do that, though, she needs another uniform because the one that she's in is completely soaked through. She's able to find one. She also bandages up her arm, which was injured during the fall. And then she gets to work on finding the goods around the silo that will allow her to kind of build a bridge, and she's able to do it. She builds that bridge, she gets over to the other side, and then she starts to look around for where this noise is coming from. The noise ends up being an ID card that was on an oscillating fan. It was just clanking on it. But the lights in this particular section are on, so curiosity gets the best of Juliet and she starts to look around a little bit. She doesn't really find anything of note, and she starts to head back to where she came, hoping that maybe she can find a way down to mechanical or find an extra suit. That's going to be tough because the silo is flooded after all. But that's when she starts to hear music, and it forces her to turn back around. As she gets closer and closer to where the music is coming from, finally she says, "Hello? Is anybody there?" And there's a giant vault door, but she can't access it. That's when a guy appears from behind the vault door. The guy tells her that it's great that she heard the music because he loves that song, but she did try to open the door. And he understands it. I mean, somebody sees a closed door, curiosity gets the best of them. They're going to want to find out what's on the other side. But if she does that again, he tells her, "I'm going to kill you." In episode 2, you find out what happened in the silo immediately after Juliet went over the hill. All hell broke loose. Everybody was shocked. Bernard looked at the pack to see what he should do, and it clearly states, if somebody does not clean, prepare for war. When Bernard steps out of his office, he sees that everybody's kind of in a panic. He finds Sims, and he tells them that they need to do an 8 p.m. curfew, and the sheriff deputies are now under Sims' command. Normally, Sims just kind of takes these orders, but he's freaking out a little bit, and he tells Bernard, people need to know what happened. I mean, they're talking another rebellion. And Bernard's planned for that. He's going to make a statement later that night to the entire silo to tell them what happened, because Bernard knows what happened. He knows about the heat tape. And he gives Sims 2 people from the Down Deep that Sims needs to take into custody because of this. Those 2 are Walker and Carla. Upon getting this news, Sims heads down to Billings' office and tells him that now the sheriffs are under his control. And Billings, just like everybody else, is surprised at how this is all being handled. He's also freaking out a little bit. It's a popular trend in this episode. Sims tells Billings that all of this is an act to get back to normal, but Billings says, how are we going to get back to normal? She walked over the hill. To which Sims says, we're just going to act coolly and calmly. Billings then asks if he's supposed to continue his report on Juliet's cleaning, and Sims says, yeah, of course. But Billings hasn't gotten Sims' statement, so Sims gives him one. He tells him that Bernard knew Juliet had a red level relic in her possession. He led him to the cornfield. Once he got it, Nichols said she wanted to go out. Then raiders came in to apprehend her and she took off running. That's the statement. But it's all fishy to Billings. The fact that Bernard destroyed this relic and the fact that Juliet said she wanted to go out, but then she took off running. He doesn't quite buy it. And when he questions Sims on all of this, Sims just kind of shrugs his shoulders and says, who knows why she did what she did. While Sims was talking to Billings, Bernard had gone to meet with Judge Meadows, who, upon finding out the news that Juliet went over the hill, she immediately poured out her drink. Looked like a mimosa. Delicious. She realized she probably needs to be clear-minded for what's about to take place. And when Bernard shows up, he wants to formulate a plan on how to handle this. He's shown up telling her that he's going to make an announcement to the silo and he wants her behind him in a show of unity. But it's clear to Judge Meadows that he's freaked out. And he admits, I'm not freaked out about what could happen to us. I'm freaked out about what I saw, and more importantly, what she saw. I mean, she went over that hill and she saw bodies upon bodies upon bodies. A silo that destroyed itself upon war. And if it can happen over there, it can happen here. When Judge Meadows mentions how his precious order brings up protocols, he says, not this. I mean, the founders wouldn't have imagined that this was possible, and everyone just watched it. When Meadows realizes that he's shown up to formulate a plan, she kind of laughs and says, I can't help you. And Bernard shoots back, you were my shadow. And she says, yeah, well, I was until I wasn't. Meadows gets a little despondent, and at this point, Bernard is frustrated. He shakes his head and he says, I'll never understand you. I mean, what are you not telling me? You're hiding something, and I need your help. So if you're not willing to do it for the silo or old time's sake, then what do you want? Meadows gets so frustrated, she tells him, you still don't know me, but I'll tell you what I'll settle for. She goes over to her bookcase and pulls out a copy of The Wizard of Oz and explains the plot to Bernard about how it was this all-powerful wizard, but he turned out to be a fraud. And at the end of it, he got in a hot air balloon and he flew away. That's when she looks Bernard dead in the eye and says, if you can do that for me and provide a balloon for me to fly away, then I'll help you. But if not, piss off. That's what was going on at the top, but in the down deep, when Juliet went over that cliff, they freaked out even more so because they actually knew her. And to them, this is proof that they can get out of the silo. Poor Hank is up there trying to restore order, but it is not working. And finally, Knox gets up on a table. He gets everybody's attention and he starts saying that they have a right to ask questions, sure, because they just saw something that they'd never seen before. I mean, after all, Juliet was one of their own. But when Shirley hears that, she screams out, then why did you turn her in? He admits that he did have to turn her in, but he had to because they knew that Juliet was in the down deep. And if he didn't turn her in, then they would have torn the homes apart. Shirley starts getting the crowd riled up because she wants to shut the power down in the silo, send a message to up top. But Knox says we can't do that. I mean, yeah, sure, we can shut it down once, and then they'll crush us. These two continue to go back and forth until finally Walker grabs a hose, starts spraying the crowd, and tells them, don't we have work to do? Once the crowd starts to kind of disperse, Knox goes up to Shirley and says, you are not helping. You got to chill out. This place is a tinderbox, and you're trying to be the match. But Shirley's sick of it. She's sick of the lies. She wants answers, and she just walks off. The first place that Shirley heads is to go talk to Walker, who looked like she was handling this all right, but she wasn't. She's pretty upset about what she saw, and she just wants to be left alone. As Shirley is leaving, though, Hank is showing up because he got the orders from up top that he needs to take Shirley in. And unfortunately, he needs to make it look good. That means putting her in cuffs and then dragging her to the cell. Everybody in the down deep sees Hank parade Walker around in cuffs until finally they end up at the cell. But at least when she gets there, she knows she's not alone because Carla is also in the cell. Hank, however, isn't going to grill either of these women too hard because he knows that this is a dog and pony show. News, though, of Walker's arrest gets around pretty quickly to those in the down deep. While Shirley's been advised not to do anything, she meets with a bunch of like-minded individuals in the shadows, and they discuss what exactly this could be about. And Shirley feels like it's got to be about the heat tape. She feels like they swapped out the heat tape and that Judicial knew that the heat tape in the suit wouldn't work. All they have to do is get to Walker and find out what she knows, which is going to be a lot easier said than done. Before anybody can put any action into place, Bernard addresses the silo in his speech, and to his surprise, Judge Meadows does show up in a sign of unity. She stands right behind him. She's in a really good position to hear Bernard tell the entire silo that what happened to Juliet was a success, and she should be championed for her efforts. Bernard starts weaving this lie about how IT was working on a different kind of heat tape for the suit. And when they proposed it to Juliet, she agreed to use this new heat tape. And that's what everybody saw. A suit that allows you to be outside longer. While everybody saw her go over the hill, though, she definitely died. Her sacrifice, though, is the first step forward in leaving the silo. And to that, everybody cheers. But way down about 100 floors, Shirley hears this and tells the entire crowd, no, that's a lie. Juliet found out that they were using bad tape, and she had it swapped out with the good tape. Bernard is lying. Now, keep in mind, Bernard can't hear this because he's 100 floors up. But Judicial hears it, and one of Sims's guys tries to arrest Shirley until Knox puts a stop to it. Shirley, however, isn't appreciative of Knox. She once again walks off. Knox has been doing a lot of heavy lifting, just trying to keep this situation under control. So much so that he went to a buddy and said, if anybody asks you to build weapons, please don't do it. He knows that people like Shirley are trying to start a rebellion at this point. Once the mayor's speech is done, though, Hank goes back to the cell and he releases both Walker and Carla, which is a big surprise to them. I mean, they were already planning on how they were going to handle this situation, who was going to take the blame and whatnot. They weren't expecting to go free, especially without being interrogated, but they're able to. Once she's released, Walker follows Cooper, who was instructed by Knox to follow Shirley. Cooper, though, isn't there to help out Knox. He wants in on whatever Shirley's got going. When Shirley starts telling Cooper about Bernard's lie, that's when Walker comes out of the shadows and says, you don't know what you're talking about. You got to stop talking like this. They have eyes and ears everywhere, and you guys aren't built for this anyway. So stop talking about the tape and Juliet. It's hazardous for your health. Shirley starts asking Walker if she's with them or not, and Walker kind of laughs at her. She breaks down the situation about how up top, they're pretty much ready for anything. If they want to fight, they're definitely ready for that, and the people in the down deep are going to lose. Shirley, though, is hard-headed and tells Walker, well, maybe the raiders and the deputies will want to know the truth, and they'll switch sides. Walker says maybe. Walker then brings up how she overheard on the radio there's graffiti around that says JL, which clearly stands for Juliet Lives. And Shirley gets excited and says, yeah, no, I mean, I agree with that. What do you think? Upon which Walker thinks for a second or two and says, well, with all of you guys wanting the truth, I think you're right. I think Juliet lives. Up top, though, it's a different story. Bernard gets a good update from Sims that there were no arrests after his speech. Everything seems to be going okay, except for the graffiti. After his update from Sims, he goes and has a chat with Judge Meadows. They discuss the success of the day. He thanks Judge Meadows for showing up. And then he reiterates that he needs Judge Meadows' help. He figures this speech bought him a few days, but he tells her, I can't do this without you. And she asks, because I'm the only other person that's been in that vault? But he tells her, it's because you're the only person that I will listen to. I tried to find another shadow. You set the bar too high. She agrees to help him, but on one condition. She wants Bernard to get some of the good tape and put it aside for her until the crisis is over. Because she wants her freedom. She wants what Juliet Nichols has. She wants to go outside. In episode 3, a boy named Teddy was arrested down in Mechanical for the graffiti, JL, Juliet Lives. This is a big deal because the kid's a teenager. And after he gets arrested, Shirley holds kind of a town hall meeting where Teddy's mom shows up and says that Teddy did it, and she supports it. What they're worried about, though, is that Judicial is going to make Teddy an example. It's become quite obvious to them that Mechanical is getting punished for what Juliet did, and they're not going to stand for it. And Shirley is spearheading this. This was orchestrated by Bernard, who is up at the top, and he meets with Judge Meadows. He wants to discuss the order. She read the order years ago, and she doesn't remember a lot of it, but one of the things she does remember is the fact that in an event of a failed cleaning, prepare for war. Also, you're supposed to crack down on graffiti if it supports a rebellion or it glorifies the person who failed to clean. And the suggestion is to blame Mechanical for this. Rally the silo against the down deep and then crush that rebellion. This, however, this is a tricky situation because Juliet is from Mechanical. It's also a tricky situation because neither Judge Meadows nor Bernard have ever dealt with this. None of them have. While the order says what to do, it's unclear if it'll actually work. Bernard, though, has already taken steps to follow the order. He tells Judge Meadows that they arrested a boy down in Mechanical for the graffiti. They didn't catch him on camera because most of the cameras below 120 have been knocked out. He figures that Juliet somehow discovered that there were cameras and she told the others, so they don't have video of this. They were just tipped off. One thing's kind of bothered Judge Meadows, and it's the fact that she met Juliet twice, and Juliet didn't really seem the type that would want to go outside. Bernard says she was caught with a red-level relic. I mean, it only had a 200-year-old cleaning video that she flashed on the screen for a few seconds, but other than that, I don't know what she wanted with it. I destroyed it. Judge Meadows then confirms with Bernard that Juliet actually said the words, "I want to go outside." And Bernard says yes, that's exactly what she said. Judge Meadows then tells Bernard that they need to think outside the box with this because this is a weird situation. They can't just follow the order word for word. So she orders him to release Teddy, show some mercy. Meadows then turns to leave, but she stops at the doorway, turns back to Bernard and says, Juliet went to Silo 17, correct? When Bernard confirms this, Meadows asks, could she survive in there? And Bernard tells her that's doubtful. I mean, that silo's been dead for a long time. Before I made you my shadow. And that was 25 years ago, so we get a timeline on how long ago that rebellion took place. This also means, though, that Judge Meadows and Bernard are well aware that there are more silos out there. Meadows goes to leave, and even though she ordered Bernard to let Teddy go, Bernard's going to do it, but he's going to do it his way. He meets with Sims, and he asks about the two people that helped Juliet, Patrick and Danny. Sims tells him that they're in seclusion, and they're waiting for the, quote, medication. The medication quite literally makes you forget. But Bernard is going to use this to his advantage. He tells Sims to go to Patrick Kennedy and convince him to start a riot in the Down Deep. And the way they're going to do that is using that medication that makes you forget. Because Patrick Kennedy has been a mess since his wife died. A medication that makes you forget would absolutely be something that somebody who's in pain would want. He'd want to forget that pain. And Sims tells him that we can make you forget way, way, way before you ever met her. All you have to do is go down there and light the match. Sims then goes to an old retired raider who's the best shot in the silo. This guy's won awards for it. And he tells the raider that he's being sent to the Down Deep. And while he's supposed to post up and be security, his real goal is to send a message using his particular set of skills. Sims then sends both Patrick and this raider, a guy named Reginald Smalls, to the Down Deep, and he waits. He waits for Shirley and her group to demand justice for Teddy, and that's exactly what happens. They show up, they demand that Teddy be let go. Hank, along with Knox, are trying to qualm this storm, and that's when Patrick does his part. He lights a Molotov cocktail, he throws it. This incites panic, which allows Reginald to open fire. It's unclear if he meant to do this, but Reginald does hit a target. Unfortunately, though, it's Cooper. And this is devastating to Shirley, Knox, and everybody who knew him, because they know that Cooper was just an innocent bystander who actually, in that moment, was trying to stop Patrick Kennedy from throwing the Molotov cocktail. Now, while all that is going on in the Down Deep, up top, Judge Meadows isn't quite sure that she can just take Bernard's word for it, that Juliet wanted to go outside. So she ends up meeting with Paul Billings and asks him about his report on the situation. And he tells her that right now he's pretty much met with everybody, and they're all keeping the same story, that Juliet asked to go outside, but it's kind of hearsay. They're all really just going on Sims and Bernard's word. Nobody else actually heard her say it. There is one other person that Billings has to meet with, and then he's closing his investigation. Meadows encourages him with going through in that last interview, and then she seems to send him on his way, but he stops and says, I have to tell you, I have the syndrome. Meadows nods and says, I know. Sims let me know that they're willing to make an exception. I agree with it. She goes on to explain to Paul that she doesn't think that they should just follow the pact or the order, all because of some preconceived notions. Because humans weren't made to just live in a silo. This does seem to kind of make Paul a little more comfortable. And later that day, he does meet with the final person that he has to talk to about what happened with the Juliet situation. After he goes through with this interview, he's actually convinced that Juliet did not ask to go outside. And upon conclusion, he runs up to tell Judge Meadows. He tells Judge Meadows that the last raider he interviewed said that she was just focused on doing her job. And if the other raiders said that she wanted to go out, then that's what she said. That put a seed of doubt in Paul because he remembers bringing Juliet up the stairs, and she said that she didn't say she wanted to go outside. In that moment, he didn't know if he could believe her. Paul's pissed because in the pact it clearly states that if there were doubts on somebody saying they wanted to go out, then an investigation needs to go down. But there wasn't one. Meadows tells Paul that she'll take it from there, and then Paul heads back to his office where he gets a call from Hank about what happened in the Down Deep. Hank's pretty upset about all of this. So when Paul asks, do you need anything? Hank says, yeah, we need you. Hank knows that there's unrest going on with his people, especially with Shirley. Now, with Coop getting killed, it's only going to ignite it even more. Knox also knows this, so he meets privately with Shirley and he tells her, We can't keep doing it the way that you want. I want to know the truth as badly as anybody else, but the way you're doing this is a recipe for disaster. And a frustrated Shirley asks, all right, well then how would you do it? Knox asks her if she remembers when they were kids and they used to explore way in the down deep. I'm talking that tunnel that was hidden with all the graffiti that eventually led to that giant drill. Shirley tells him, yeah, I remember. Why? He tells her he finally thinks he knows what that giant wall of names means. Back with Meadows, though, after finding out that Bernard probably lied to her, she has a pretty emotional response to it. She plays an old home movie. It's not her home movie. It's just somebody's home movie, but it's kids playing outside. It's really emotional for her. She collects herself, though, after this, when Bernard shows up to tell her exactly how he's going to orchestrate her actually going outside. She's fine. He tells her that he's going to shut down the servers for, quote, routine maintenance, which will include shutting down the cameras. He'll operate the airlock. It'll give her 5 minutes to get over the hill. And then after that, he has to reactivate the screens. But he does ask her, are you sure you want to do this? And her answer to that is, when do I get my suit? Because she doesn't have one. Bernard tells her that they're going to have to make her one, and he starts taking the measurements. And as he's doing this, I'm just going to say there's some sexual tension going on. You get the feeling Bernard probably writes a little bit of Judge Judy fan fiction in his spare time. Meadows, though, isn't having it. She confronts him about the fact that he didn't let Teddy go when she told him to. He waited until a mini rebellion started so he could squash it. And then she confronts him on the fact that Juliet Nichols didn't actually ask to go outside. To that, Bernard doesn't even say anything. He just grabs the measurements and then he leaves. One person in the silo that we haven't talked about is Juliet's dad, who's been handling the whole situation really well. Since the events, he's been going to these gardens and kind of just sitting there with his thoughts. But one night he goes there and there's another woman there. And she explains that she's there because her and her husband are once again up for the lottery. And she's really excited about it. She really wants to be a mom. Dr. Nichols starts telling her all about being a parent, how great it is, and how special those moments are. All the while, he never reveals who he is. So when she introduces herself as Phoebe Wells and he introduces himself as Dr. Nichols, she's mortified. Because everybody knows who Dr. Nichols is. More importantly, everybody knows who Dr. Nichols' daughter is. And the only reason that Phoebe is up for this lottery is because of what Juliet did. So it's a little bit of catch-22 for her. But Dr. Nichols assures her that it's okay, and he wishes her nothing but the best. The next day, when he gets to his office, he finds out that Phoebe has been approved. Kind of. It's the bait and switch. They want Dr. Nichols to take out the placebo birth control, making Phoebe think that she's able to conceive, but all the while, she actually can't. This pisses off Dr. Nichols. So when Phoebe and her husband come in to get the birth control removed, Dr. Nichols takes out the placebo, but then he takes out the actual birth control as well. And then finally, over with Juliet in the other silo, Silo 17, she starts to slowly get this mystery man to warm up to her. He tells her that his name is Solo, because he's solo. And he tells her exactly what happened in his silo. There was a guy named Ron Tucker, and he didn't clean. Instead, he wrote lies on the camera, and then he went around the corner out of sight. And this made people think that it was safe to go outside. This spurned what Juliet saw, because all the people never saw him die. This terrifies Juliet. She suddenly realizes that what happened in this silo could easily happen in her silo, and she could be to blame for it because they didn't see her die. So she needs to get back ASAP. She starts looking all over Silo 17 for a suit, but she's unable to find one. When she returns back to Solo, he had left the vault. He actually left her some food, but then he went back in. Juliet, who is famished, is just happy to get the food, and they start making small talk again, and she explains why she decided not to clean, how she found out it was all bullshit. What tipped her off was the birds in the video. When she got outside, she saw birds moving exactly the same way she did on a computer screen in the silo. And that's when she realized, this isn't real. She then asks him, though, why are you alive? And he tells her, if I wasn't alive, who would guard the vault? She says, no, how long have you been in there? And he once again doesn't answer. He just tells her that he does his job, and he keeps the doors shut. But Juliet points out that people have clearly tried to get in, and there are bodies in the hallway that clearly aren't as old as the others. So, what happened? But Solo doesn't answer. Juliet realizes she might have pushed him a little too far, so she starts thanking him for the food. And he says, "I didn't do it to be nice. I did it because if you ate the food, I'd know that you were real and I wasn't imagining you." Juliet decides to leave Solo alone and go catch a nap, but she's woken up a few hours later to loud music. When she goes back to Solo's vault, he's excited because he has a great idea. Use a firefighter suit. Initially, Juliet doesn't believe that a firefighter suit will work, but Solo reminds her that the suit that she actually used to get to the silo that she's in wasn't designed to be outside either. There's only one problem, though. Getting to the floor that have the firefighter suits is going to require Juliet to go underwater. This is doable, though. She just needs to create a device that will pump air down below. But she's going to need Solo's help to do that, which means convincing him to come out of the vault. Solo, though, is totally against leaving the vault. And Juliet understands, but she's also frustrated because she needs this guy's help. And she pleads with him that if he helps her, they might be able to stop what happened in his silo from happening in hers. Still, though, he tells her, I can't leave. Juliet knows this guy's been through some stuff. I mean, there's graffiti carved into the wall that says we will get in sooner or later. So him being hesitant to trust Juliet is understandable. And she tells him, all right, well, thanks for the food. I'll catch you around. That changes everything. The fact that she's not adamant about getting into the vault and she's willing to just let him be, it all changes Solo's mindset. And he decides to actually come out of the vault. He's still extremely skittish, though, when Juliet recognizes this, but it's a step in the right direction. In episode 4, Solo quickly warms up to Juliet. The fact that this is the first person he's actually been able to have a conversation with in 25 years is really refreshing. The problem is he's about as annoying as my 5-year-old. It's just constant chatter. Everything he sees he needs to point out. He's changing topics left and right, and all Juliet cares about is finding a way to make this breathing apparatus work. And she realizes that Solo is going to be super, super talkative. So she is really good about dealing with it, but she also wants to focus. Anytime, though, she does bring up what happened to him in the rebellion, his whole mood changes. He goes from this happy guy to not wanting to talk about anything and shutting down. The two head to a classroom not too far away that has a blackboard that will allow Juliet to work out problems. It's there, though, that Solo works out the biggest problem, how she's going to breathe underwater. Because he sees an organ and he starts playing it. But what he points out is the pedals could actually help her breathe underwater if used properly. This is big. It's going to allow Juliet to breathe underwater, but it's going to require Solo to keep pumping. If he doesn't, she's going to drown. So Juliet is putting all of her faith into this guy. Not as if, though, she has much of a choice. After a little bit, they get all the proper tools together. They hook this thing up. It does work. Solo's doing his part, but as he's pumping, he's getting more and more paranoid about leaving the vault. Juliet, though, is able to get the firefighter suit. It comes at a cost, though. I mean, she almost drowns and she bangs up her hand pretty good, but she gets it. Once she returns to the surface on the other side, Solo runs back to the vault in a panic. He goes over to the vault, he puts in the combination, but initially it doesn't work, and he freezes up. He panics. He starts blaming Juliet, questioning what she did. Juliet trying to point out, Solo, I was with you the entire time, I didn't do anything. He puts in the combination again, and it doesn't work, and at this point he has one more chance until it locks forever. He really, really focuses, he puts in what he thinks is the combination, and it works. But he's so freaked out that he gives Juliet a death stare, he goes back into the vault, and he closes it. Realizing this is a delicate situation, she gives Solo a few minutes. She sits down and she starts telling him how absolutely terrified she was when she was sent out to clean, how she had accepted death. This story doesn't really work, so she tries to engage Solo by asking him more about the circus, which was something he was telling Juliet about before. With all that time in the silo by himself, Solo read up a lot, so he's very, very knowledgeable about what life was like before living in a silo. Still, though, Solo doesn't say anything, and at this point, Juliet gets up because she's kind of given up hope. But as she's walking away, Solo unlocks the latch. He comes out and he starts telling her about all the animals in the circus. Back over with Juliet's silo, deep, deep, deep down, Knox is showing Shirley what he was talking about. All those names on the walls. What he thinks it is are people from Mechanical who were blamed for past rebellions. And there are so many names on here that it indicates rebellions are basically a once-in-a-generation thing. But every time, Mechanical gets blamed. There's also indications that these rebellions weren't actually Mechanical's fault. They were literally just blamed for them. And the reason he thinks this is the case is because Mechanical are the folks that can shut the silo down. He's prepared to do that if they don't get what they want. And sure, they want revenge for everything that happened, but more than anything, they just want the truth. So what he wants to do is head up with a very, very small contingent. Shirley, Knox, a few others, and they go up and they meet with the judge. Maybe they'll be able to get answers from her. They want to make it very clear that this meeting is going to be peaceful. They don't want to make waves, which is the reason why they're going with a small contingent. They send word to Judge Meadows for this meeting and she agrees. But it's not the only meeting she agrees to. She also agrees to have a meeting with Lucas about reducing his sentence. And the fact that she's agreeing to meet with Lucas, who's seen as a threat by IT, while also agreeing to meet with the Down Deep, is raising a lot of questions for Sims, but also for Bernard. And Sims implores Bernard to talk to her because he knows that Bernard has her ear, but he's like, what do you want me to do, man? She's the judge. While he dismisses Sims' request, he does follow through with it. He does question the judge on why exactly she's having these meetings. Bernard questions this decision-making, and Meadows says, this is a sign of a new regime. And just because I'm taking these meetings doesn't mean I have to do anything. I'm literally just placating these people. Lucas has a right to an appeal. The Down Deep has a right to talk to me. When Bernard pressures her again, she brings up the suit, asking, exactly where is that? And clearly Bernard doesn't have it, so Meadows sends him packing, saying, you can come back when you have my suit. The first meeting she's going to have is with Lucas. And her attitude right off the bat kind of tells Lucas that this is a waste of time. So he asks, why exactly did you even bother granting this? She tells him that she did it because she wants to know about the lights in the night sky. She wants to know what he thinks they are. He tells her that because they move, he feels like we live on a sphere that moves around. It's the same with the sun. It doesn't move. The ball moves. This is very, very accurate, but not quite the answer. And Meadows, knowing the answer, fills in the spaces. She explains that the lights in the sky are stars, they're bits of fire from millions of years ago, and the sun is just a giant culmination of them. When he starts asking more questions, though, she calls in the agents, putting an end to the meeting and reducing his sentence by 5 years in the mines. This entire meeting is very, very confusing to Lucas. But after he's taken out by security, she overhears a commotion coming from outside her window. It's a few people who are clamoring to have her impeached. Yeah, Meadows didn't see that coming. And that's because Sims, Bernard, well, a bunch of people are pissed off that folks from the Down Deep are making their way up top. There's definite classism. And quite frankly, they don't want Mechanical's kind coming up top. The group from Mechanical, by the way, is going to be made up of Knox, Shirley, Walker, and Carol. This is a pretty long journey. It's going to require multiple stops. And at one stop, Knox and Shirley start talking about what happens if they get the request that they want, which is to go outside and volunteer. After all, you got Bernard talking about advanced minutes in suits. And Shirley is all about it. She would absolutely volunteer to go outside. Knox is right there with her. And he wants to see the distance, but he also wants to see Juliet. Because not knowing exactly what happened to her is killing him. They continue, though, to make their way up top with a little bit of a police escort because they're completely unaware of how many people are anti this meeting. As they're making their way up top, Billings has made his way down. He meets with Hank to go over exactly what happened with this murder, the firebombing, all of it. Hank explains that Cooper ran in and tried to stop the guy with the firebomb. And the reason why he's being referred to as the guy is because they don't know it's Patrick. They head to the coroner's office to inspect Cooper's body, but they're met with a surprise. Not only is Coop's body not there, but the mystery man, the guy who threw the firebomb, his body's gone too. The coroner tells Hank that when she arrived in the morning, there was only one body, and that was Coop's. Judicial showed up, they demanded a body, and they took it. So now you've got 2 bodies missing. Billings starts to ask her, can you describe the guy who threw the bomb? And she starts to do it, and that rings a bell with Billings. He thinks he has an idea of who he is. He radios a couple coworkers and is able to confirm that Patrick Kennedy was probably the guy. They tell him that he was gagged and bagged by Judicial. Billings asks Hank, are you sure that the guy who threw the bomb was actually dead? And Hank tells him that a doctor didn't say he was, but the guy was shot. But then he really thinks about it and he realizes the guy was shot in the shoulder. So it's very possible that he did survive. Now, as for his boss up top, Judge Meadows, she's livid about this impeachment talk. And she goes to discuss it with Bernard because she thinks that he's the one who did it. In reality, all of this was drummed up by Sims. It was his idea. But she doesn't know that. Bernard tells her that it wasn't him, but that there are a lot of people who were mad that she's meeting with people from Mechanical. And she explains that if everybody just saw exactly what these people were requesting, they probably wouldn't be that mad about the meeting. All Mechanical wants is to improve the suits, go out and explore for a little bit. And Bernard loses it because that is completely against the pact. But Meadows tells him, I wasn't going to grant it. I was going to tell them that we were going to get a committee to talk about advancements, placate these people. That's it. And the fact that she wasn't actually going to go through with it is a relief to Bernard. He then asks her if she wants to come over later that night for dinner because he has her suit ready and she can try it on. And that's all she cares about. So she says, yeah, I'll be there. Later that night, she shows up. Bernard has prepared the meal. They eat. But once she's done, she says, great, I'd like to try on my suit now. The bad news is she's never trying on her suit because Bernard poisoned the meal. And you can tell from his face that he feels really, really bad about this, but he also feels like he had no choice. She is stunned. She only has a few minutes. She asks why. And he tells her, I must follow the order. Your death is going to unite the silo. Realizing she doesn't have a lot of time, she frantically asks Bernard what happened to the hard drive that Juliet Nichols had. And Bernard tells her, I destroyed it. But if there's something on there that I need to know about, you need to tell me now. And she tells him, even if you did know, there's nothing you can do about it. All I can say is it had something to do with Salvador Quinn. 140 years ago when he was the head of IT during the rebellion. He wrote a letter, it was encrypted and covered in code. Bernard, knowing full well that Meadows had deciphered it, starts begging her to tell him what that letter said, but she won't. Instead, she starts rehashing their relationship. How 25 years ago, when she stepped down as Bernard's shadow, she did it because she knew that he could never commit himself fully to her. So she disappeared for 4 days, she came back, and she resigned. And he's always wondered where she went, but she doesn't tell him. He does, however, want her to go with having seen the outside. After all, that's all she wanted. He's able to do this because Bernard has a VR headset. And when he puts it on Meadows, it is as if she's looking at a whole new world. Rainforests, mountains, volcanoes, you name it. She is completely shocked. She ends up dying in Bernard's arms, but once she is gone, Bernard calls Sims because now they need to formulate a plan. Mechanical is quickly rising. Once Mechanical does reach IT, they're greeted by an angry mob who demands that they head back downstairs. They kind of expected this. They came prepared. They first try to talk the mob down with words, but that doesn't work. So then they use force. Not violent force, mechanical force. Using a red tennis ball, they drop it, signaling down below to turn off the silo, sending a message that they do actually have power. And this message works. Bernard comes out and he says, okay, you guys can go meet with the judge. Let's go. He's not letting everybody in, though. He's only letting Knox and Shirley in. But once they get in the room, they see that Sims is sitting there along with Judge Meadows. But Judge Meadows is sitting in her chair dead with a knife plunged in her heart, and it's clear that they just walked into a setup. They know they need to get out of there immediately, but they need to do so calm and cool and collected, or else it's going to trigger a mob. It's not like Sims or Bernard are stopping them, by the way. They let them get out. And once they get back to Carol and Walker, they say, we got to go now. And they start making their way down the silo as quickly as possible. A little while later, Sims comes out, he addresses the mob, and he lets everybody know that those animals from Mechanical came up here and they just murdered the judge. They need to be brought to justice, Meadows' death can't be in vain. And as the foursome from Mechanical quickly make their way down, they've got an angry mob on their tail. In episode 5, as the group from Mechanical tries to make their way back home, Sims heads home himself, and he tells his wife exactly what happened, and her big concern is whether or not this could be traced back to Sims. He doesn't really see how it could, but as they're discussing this, their son walks in and says, "Hey, there's a man in our kitchen." And that man is Bernard, who had overheard their conversation. So he knows that Sims is telling his wife everything. He also knows that Sims was the one who put people up to the idea that Judge Meadows should be impeached. In Bernard's opinion, that kind of triggered everything that went down. Bernard having to poison Judge Meadows, which was something he didn't really want to do, but in his mind, it'll end up working out best for the silo. He, however, is so upset about having to do this that he needs someone to blame, and Sims is that guy. So he tells Sims, "I can't trust you anymore, and you're definitely not going to be my shadow. What I am going to do is I'm going to make you the judge because you're far too valuable to the silo." And then he swears Sims in. But just like with Meadows, being named judge is kind of just a title. In reality, Bernard is calling the shots, and he just took away Sims's power in a lot of ways. With Sims taking the judge job, there's an opening for Sims' old job, the head of IT security. And a person named Rick Admonson is going to take that. Rick's first job is to find the group from Mechanical, ASAP, but he's having a hard time doing that. There's bounties out there, and there are raiders dressed as civilians. They're eventually going to get found. It's just a matter of when it happens. The news, though, of the power change reaches Billings and Hank in the Down Deep. And Billings, for one, is shocked. Hank is also very surprised when he finds out that Meadows was killed allegedly by his friends. He just doesn't see how that could be possible. Hank mentions how this is ironic, being a sheriff's deputy and having to hunt his friends. And that's when Paul says, yeah, it's about as ironic as breaking the pact that you have to uphold. And what he means by that is he has the syndrome. He's admitting to Hank this, and Hank doesn't really care. He just asks if Sims knows, and Billings says, yeah, he knows, and he made an exception, but now that he's judge, he's just not sure. And you can tell it's really bothering him. So Hank gets the conversation back to what the hell's going on in the Down Deep. They get their first lead on Patrick when they're in the cafeteria and they see a woman that is taking a meal after working a long shift in the cafeteria. To Hank, that's fishy. The fact that she was just surrounded by all that food for hours and she's just taking it home. And this particular woman happens to be the niece of Patrick. They're able to convince her to give up Patrick's location. And he was hiding right behind the sign, that little hole that would eventually lead you to the drill that created the silo. He was in one of those hallways. When Hank and Billings find Patrick, he is badly injured. He also doesn't trust either of them. Now, Hank, he goes and leaves to get a medical kit because it's pretty clear that Patrick isn't going to make it too much longer. But Billings stays, and he presses Patrick on exactly what happened, but Patrick doesn't want to give him any information. So Billings realizes that he needs to give to get, hands Patrick a picture of the outside world before all this took place that he found in Juliet's apartment. He tells Patrick, if you turn that in and you say that I had it, I'm done, I'm finished. With Patrick looking at it, he tells Billings, get me a doctor and I'll tell you everything you need to know. Hell, I'll tell you everything you don't want to know. Now, as for the people from Mechanical who are trying to make their way home safely, and we're talking Carol, Shirley, Walker, and Knox, they realize that they're not going to be able to outrun this mob. They're going to have to find a safe place, lay low, and maybe find a safer way home than just taking the stairs. And Carol has an idea. She knows an old porter named Calvin who might be able to help them out. She tells them that they're going to need a safe space to kind of just hunker down and also safe transport home. And he says it's going to cost you a lot, including items from Juliet Nichols. They agree on a little bit more of a price, and then Calvin explains that he's going to get them home via some grain bins. No one will bat an eye. The issue is Knox. He's never going to fit in those. Carol suggested they use this powerful cable and winch system, but Calvin says no, it was taken out of circulation thanks to the pact. If you use that, it's going to draw a lot of eyeballs. But in Carol's opinion, that's the only way that they're going to all safely get home. As she's trying to convince Calvin to give her the winch, Knox runs in and says, we got to get out of here, raiders are coming. Almondson's men have been able to locate them. It wasn't without help, though. Calvin turned them in because there's a big bounty on them. Carol realizes she's kind of holding the group back because she's just injured and she's old and she doesn't want to do it anymore. She also knows that Walker, having stayed inside for 20 years, that's going to benefit her. Nobody knows what she looks like. Carol decides to stay back and let the group get a head start. She no longer wants to hold them back, and she knows that her sacrifice might end up giving them some more time. And they don't want to do it, but she kind of ends up forcing their hand. Walker uses her incognito status to do just that, stay incognito. But after a little bit, Shirley and Knox are caught by raiders. At first, they're stopped by members of the silo who are acting as if they're town watch, and they try to talk their way out of it, but it doesn't work. And that's when they're taken into custody. But they're taken into custody by Sims's wife, Camille. And while Camille tells everybody, I'm taking them in and we're going to bring these people to justice, in reality, what she's doing is saving them. Because those members of the silo, they were ready to string up Knox and Shirley. They were ready to bring them justice right then and there. Camille knew that. So she handcuffed both of them, but then she took them to a safe space, a janitorial closet. She ends up kicking the guy who was in there out, telling him, if anybody comes looking for these two, you have never seen them. It's obvious Camille has something on this guy. And then she tells both Knox and Shirley that once she steps foot outside of this hallway and everybody sees that she doesn't have them in custody, raiders will come searching. So hunker down, lay low for a while. And also, there is a barricade on floor 30. She doesn't know how they're going to get through it, but that's not really her problem. Knox does ask, why exactly are you helping us? But she doesn't answer. But the reason why she's helping them is because she doesn't like how her husband's being treated. She thinks that Sims is the right man for the job, and she doesn't like the fact that the shadow ship was taken away from him. Frankly, she wants to make Bernard look bad. And the longer that Shirley and Knox continue to go without being caught, it does just that. It makes him look bad. It also makes Almondson look bad. While Camille was stashing the fugitives, Bernard was being mayor many floors up. One of the people that day he wanted to meet with was Juliet's father, Dr. Nichols. When he called for Dr. Nichols was tending to injured members from the mob when word got out that the judge was murdered. In order to butter him up a little bit, Bernard offers him some items from Juliet's apartment that would have just been destroyed, and then turns the conversation to him helping the wounded and how that gives him hope that Dr. Nichols might be a big part of restoring order to the silo. Dr. Nichols says, what if I say no? I just want to be clear. Am I going to be punished for saying no? Because there's nothing you can take from me that hasn't already been taken. I've lost my wife, my son, and now my daughter. Let me make it clear. I wasn't tending to the wounded because of necessity to the silo. I was doing so because I was trying to reclaim some sense of professionalism. I want to practice medicine without lies and harm. All those birth controls that are supposed to be taken out but are actually left in because they're, quote, code orange. I'm the one who has to see those couples with faces of hope, and I know that that hope is unfounded. My profession is a sham. For whatever reason, my daughter is dead, and you can't control what she means to people, and you can't control what she means to me. Then he picks up the items, and he leaves. Now, the second person that the mayor wants to meet with is Lucas. Lucas has spent one day in the mines, and he doesn't look like he's built for it. Bernard gets real with him. He explains that his sentence was reduced to 5 years, but the average lifespan in the mine is 5 years. So in reality, Judge Meadows reducing the sentence was nothing more than giving him false hope. But he has a way of staying out of the mines. He knows how smart Lucas is. And what he wants is for Lucas to put together that red level relic that Juliet had. Even though he said he destroyed it, and he did smash it, he knows that you can put it back together. And somebody as smart as Lucas is the right man for that job. He gives Lucas a little while to finish the job, and then when he comes back, Lucas has been able to get through some of the files. He shows Bernard the blueprints of the silo and that tunnel that nobody knows what it leads to. Bernard tells him he's doing good, keep it up, he'll be able to stay out of the mines, and then he heads out to leave, but Lucas says, wait, there was one more file. It was a scan of a letter that Salvador Quinn wrote his wife. Bernard's eyes get wide, and he asks, what did it say? Lucas explains that it was a love letter, but then it got kind of weird. It was as if it was in code. He asks Lucas to keep deciphering it, and then he leaves, and he gets an update from Amundsen on the suspects. Amundsen tells him that an ex-raider stashed the group on one of the floors because she was concerned that they were going to get strung up. But now they're gone. And when Bernard asks, wait, why would an ex-raider do that? Who was this? Amundsen says, Camille Sims. And that infuriates Bernard because it was no accident. Knox and Shirley, though, are very much gone from that janitorial closet. They realized they couldn't stay there forever, but instead of going down, they decided to go back up. They went to go pay Calvin a visit, and Knox, being way bigger than Calvin, was able to, let's say, persuade him to give them the wench. But the wench cable wasn't going to reach the down deep, not from where Calvin was. They needed to go lower, way lower, but they also needed to do it without garnering any suspicion. That's when they decided to grab some porter outfits and head down the stairs, and it worked for a while. I mean, nobody knew that they were the two alleged killers of Judge Meadows. Eventually, though, they are seen by judicial security and told to stop, and they know that they can't go any more floors. They need to hook up the winch right then and there. Having no idea if the cable would be long enough, Shirley and Knox use their only way out, hooking themselves up and hoping for the best. They fly down the silo until they come to a screeching halt because the wire wasn't long enough. And as they dangle there, they're saved by other members of the Down Deep, who grab them just in the nick of time and pull them to safety. But Bernard, who is watching all of this from judicial security, is pissed that the two got away. Immediately, he radios Billings, because he knows Billings is down there, and he says, hey, the two fugitives are in your area. I know as a loyal member of the silo, I can count on you to bring them in. And Paul doesn't say that. He says, you can faithfully count on me to always serve the silo and the pact. Because at this point, Paul Billings knows something is not right with what Bernard was preaching. As for Juliet in the other silo, she was able to get the firefighter suit, but she wasn't able to get the firefighter helmet, so she's trying to reattach her own, but she's having trouble doing it. At one point, though, she asks Solo, hey, how are the lights on? Because the generator is flooded and underwater. And Solo tells her that IT has their own power source. It comes from the outside. That's a pretty big surprise to Juliet. She had no idea that that was a thing. But Solo turns the conversation back to the flooded generator and how water continues to rise. He asks if Juliet has any ideas, and she does, but she doesn't have time to actually execute it. And Solo really wants her to. He wants her to drop what she's currently doing, i.e. trying to find a helmet and get back home, and help stop the flooding. But she tells him, I can't do that. I got to get back home. And Solo is freaking out a little bit. He's probably only got like 10 months until it reaches his level. It's only a matter of time before he and the entire silo are flooded completely. But Juliet is steadfast. She's not helping. She's trying to find a helmet and get back. Juliet walks out and searches for this helmet. Solo follows her, and she says, Solo's not your real name, is it? And he says, no, my real name's Cole Miners. As Solo continues to just blabber on, Juliet is starting to not feel well. She's kind of keeled over. She's lethargic. So Solo rushes off to try to find her food, thinking that that might help. Juliet, though, is favoring her arm, but she fights through it. She starts looking through rooms, trying to find the missing helmet, and she finds a notice that the missing helmet was actually taken. Before the rebellion, IT asked for it back. She then is able to find the employee directory of IT, which will give her a lead on where this helmet might be. The first apartment she goes to, she doesn't find the helmet, but she finds something way more interesting. The woman's name was Trina Samuels, aka Tiny. And there's a picture of Tiny, along with a guy named Solo, and it is not her Solo. When Solo eventually catches back up to Juliet with food, he asks her, hey, what were you up to? And she tells him, I was looking for the helmet, but I found this interesting thing. I went to a Trina Samuels apartment. She was Solo's girlfriend. And Solo tries to play it off like, oh yeah, no, I haven't thought about her in a while. But Juliet calls him on the lie because he looks nothing like the picture. She grabs another piece of paper and says Cole Myers was the IT shadow. And when she picks the picture back up, Solo cuts her off and loses it, just screaming at her, I am the IT shadow. He gets in her face, he's screaming, he looks violent, and Juliet backs off. Juliet, who is terrified of what this guy might be capable of, just says, oh, okay, you're Solo. She then makes up an excuse on her not feeling well just to get out of the room and flee. She keeps on her hunt for this helmet, and you find out what's bothering Juliet. Her arm is badly infected, and her condition is worsening by the second. Being a tough girl from Mechanical, though, she just tries to fight through it, but she's laboring. The good news is she is able to locate the helmet. The bad news is shortly after she does, she collapses on the floor. In episode 6, Juliet wakes up and she's alive. Solo found her. He gave her some antibiotics, he nursed her back to health, but in the process he did do something. And that something was hide her suit. He tells her that he's not giving the suit back until she helps him with the pump. As soon as she fixes the pump, she can have the suit, she can have the helmet, and she can go back to her own silo. But without that fixed pump, there is no suit. Now, back at Juliet's silo, it's complete chaos. Not only are members of the silo very angry about the barricade that has been put up and is still up, even though Knox and Shirley clearly made it past it, no, there's even chaos going down in the Down Deep. There's infighting going on with Mechanical. Because what Bernard did was shut off the food supply. So no food is arriving in Mechanical until Shirley and Knox are turned in. And one of the issues that Knox and Shirley have is the fact that Paul is down there, and he's certainly searching for him as well. Knox and Shirley are planning on making a speech to everybody in the Down Deep, but before they do that, Knox needs to go visit his buddy. It's the same guy that he told, hey, if anybody comes here asking for weapons, don't make them. The guy did heed the order, but it didn't stop him from making weapons. He's just been stashing them. And Knox, knowing that this would be the case, is going to take full advantage of it. After getting a good look at all the weapons that the Down Deep has now to work with, Shirley and Knox go to handle this crowd that is freaking out because they have no food, and they don't really know what to do. Shirley and Knox go to address the crowd that is freaking out a little bit because they don't know what to do. I mean, the food supply is cut off, they're angry, they're stressed out, and a lot of them are screaming for Shirley and Knox just to turn themselves in. But Knox and Shirley aren't about to do that. They tell the crowd that they did not, in fact, kill the judge. They were set up. But some members of the crowd don't care. They still want Shirley and Knox to turn themselves in just to get the food supply restarted. And that's when Walker stands up and tells the crowd, this is not who we are. We are Mechanical. We help each other out. We find a way. And we will do that now. We're not turning on our own. But what really settles the crowd down is when Teddy wheels in a bunch of food that was sent to them from friends up top. They were throwing bags of food down in the trash bin that was arriving in Mechanical, and now they have a supply. News, however, about the food drops do reach Bernard, and he's not surprised about it. He actually banked on this. He's not concerned at all. In fact, he tells Edmondson, this actually speeds up our timeline. Put raiders at every single trash chute, and they'll run out of food soon enough. And this is also something that Shirley and Knox know, that it's only a matter of time before they do, in fact, run out of food, or Bernard finds a way to stop them, so they have to do something about it. They need to use those weapons and use the force that they have and back the barricade up. While they're formulating a plan, Walker is in her office, as usual, where all she can think about is Carla, because she's in love with Carla, and the fact that she doesn't know what happened to Carla is bothering her. Then she gets a knock at the door, and it's Hank and Billings. Now, even though that Bernard wants Billings to just bring Knox and Shirley in, he's a member of the law. He's going to go about this the correct way. He also, by the way, has Hank, who doesn't believe that Knox or Shirley were capable of such a thing. So while Billings is looking for Knox and Shirley, he's really doing so to get their side of the story. But in order to find Knox and Shirley, he wants to go to Walker first and find out her side of things, even though she wasn't in the room. Billings asks Walker what happened, but Walker says, I'm not telling you anything until you find out what happened to Carla. Get me that information, and then I'll help you. This is now the second issue that Billings and Hank have. The first one being Patrick. Patrick was still dealing with the gunshot wound when they found him, and he wanted a doctor. And the doctor they gave him wasn't good enough because he was a shadow. So Billings ended up emailing his wife and saying, hey, can you find the doctor? Which she was able to do. Dr. Nichols is able to make his way past the barricade, and he arrives in Mechanical to get that bullet out and heal Patrick back up. After the procedure is completed, though, Patrick doesn't want to give any information. So Billings kicks everybody out of the room, and it's the first time you really see Billings get tough with anybody. He tells Patrick that if he doesn't answer the questions, then he's going to call Judge Sims, because he's a judge now, which is something that Patrick was completely unaware of. This is the thing that causes Patrick to cave and tell Billings what he wants to know.
He reminds Billings of the time that when Nichols was on the run and all the computers went dark. Billings thought it was a system reboot, but Patrick says no, it wasn't a system reboot. It went dark because Nichols had my friend Danny put something on every single computer in the silo. Patrick starts to guess that they probably rounded up everybody who saw it, gagged and bagged so that they couldn't tell anybody. Billings is pretty confused about all of this, and Patrick says it was only up for about 10 seconds, but it was a lot like the page you showed me. The only difference, it was 1,000,000 times more beautiful. I can't even describe it. Billings is surprised about this, but what he can't figure out is where Sims comes into all of this. And Patrick tells him that shortly after Nichols got sent out, Sims showed up and he wanted to make a deal. He put on some dirty clothes, he looked incognito, he threw a firebomb, and in return, he would get some drugs that would make him forget. But considering the fact he got shot, he knows that Sims never intended on actually holding up that part of the bargain. So Billings has that to deal with, along with the fact that he needs to find out what happened with Carla, and he needs to find out where Shirley and Knox are. And Shirley and Knox have formulated a great plan. They're going to take all those weapons and a ton of people, and they're going to storm the barricade. They're going to force the Raiders back. But while they're doing that, they're distracting all of Judicial and the Raiders. And that's going to allow Teddy to literally cut his way with a saw through the silo, cutting his way up. What Teddy doesn't know, though, is that he was seen by somebody with that saw. And the fact that he had it raised a giant red flag with the aunt of a guy named Diego who works in Judicial. He's one of the guys that monitors the cameras. Diego's aunt emails him about this saw and the fact that it's really shady. But when he goes to tell Amundsen is just worried about the fact that you've got Mechanical ready to storm their barricade. So he doesn't want to hear it. And Diego knows he needs to tell somebody, so the person he tells is Sims. He tells Sims all about the group that's heading up with the weapons, but he also tells him about the second group that is using a saw. The kind of saw that would cut through concrete. Immediately, Sims goes to tell Bernard, but when he arrives in Bernard's office, he is shocked because he doesn't find Bernard, he finds Lucas Kyle, who is still doing Bernard's bidding, trying to decode Quinn's cryptic message. Sims angrily asks him where the hell is Bernard, but Lucas doesn't know. So the next person Sims goes to is his wife, who actually had a run-in earlier with Bernard. He had asked her why exactly she arrested the people and then let him go. And while she had a very plausible answer for all of this, you could tell Bernard really didn't buy it. At this point, though, Sims has come to his wife because he needs advice on what to do. And her advice is, let it happen. Bernard and Amundsen made this bed, they need to lie in it. But Sims reminds her, this could endanger a bunch of people, including our son. Sims knows that he can't do anything, because at this point he's the judge, his power's been taken away from him, but Sims says, you can, you're a Raider. And after thinking about it, Camille agrees that she's going to end up telling Amundsen and the rest of the Raiders what's going on. She puts on her tactical gear and she arrives down at the barricade right before Mechanical is ready to rip that barricade down. She tells Amundsen there's about to be a secret attack. They're coming up through the floor. A few seconds later, though, that barricade comes down. A bunch of people from Mechanical, including Shirley and Knox, rush up with weapons, and they're stopped at floor 120. There's a standoff with the Raiders and with Mechanical. Knox tells Amundsen, you might kill 10 of us, but we'll kill all of you. So how about we make this level the new boundary? And Amundsen has no choice but to give in. There's one issue, though. By backing up the barrier, it gives Mechanical a farm, which gives them a food supply, which completely negates what Bernard was actually trying to accomplish here, by starving Mechanical out. And when he finds out what Amundsen did, he rips into him. One person, though, that wasn't a part of this battle at all was Walker, who gets a knock at their door after all the commotion went down, and it's Billings. He tells Walker that he looked into what happened with Carla. Usually the process is pretty simple. Usually criminals get checked into the sheriff's department for processing, and Hank checked. There was no processing for Carla. That only really leaves one thing. Sometimes when Raiders have a high-risk suspect, they're taken into seclusion, which Walker right away says they can't do that. Carla has health issues. She starts begging Paul to do something. He is the sheriff, and he tells her, I might be able to do something, but first I have to clear her name. So please tell me what happened with Judge Meadows. Walker gives her side, and then she tells Paul where he can likely find Knox and Shirley, who are celebrating their victory in Mechanical, but also they start making out. It's hot.
and the makeout session is interrupted by Paul. At first, they think, okay, this is it. He's coming to arrest us. But he tells them that he just got back from talking to Walker, and according to her, she was told that Knox and Shirley were framed. He asks both of them, would you testify to this? And they say, absolutely. We were framed by Bernard and Sims. After confirming this, Paul gets on the radio and asks for Bernard. He tells Bernard that he's located the fugitives, but he's not revealing their location at this time. He needs to do a full investigation as to what happened in the death of Judge Meadows. Bernard panics. He tells everybody, shut the radios down now, because he realized that he just lost the sheriff. Paul goes to leave and Knox thanks him for what he did, but Paul says, for what? I'm not here to help you. I'm not here to help Bernard. I'm here to help the silo. That night, he has dinner with his wife and his daughter, and she reminds him that what he did was brave. And he says, yeah, I did something brave, but it might have been pretty stupid. I'll give it to the end of the week before I'm stripped of this sheriff job. What's eating at Paul is the fact that he doesn't know whether what he just did was the right thing or not. His wife, though, decides to change the subject. She asks him, when was the last time you took your medicine for the syndrome? And he realizes he hasn't taken it in a while. But what she's realized is the fact that he's not suffering from the symptoms. When he realizes it, he's stunned. He doesn't know why this has happened. And she says, well, maybe you changed. Up top, while Bernard is concerned about what's going on in the Down Deep with Billings, he gets word from Lucas that he's been able to find some details about this cryptic message. Lucas set up a program to try to decipher it, and while he doesn't know exactly what it is, he's been able to decipher words here and there, so he thinks he's on the right track. Problem is, none of the other words are really coherent, and it looks like it's just a code within a code. Bernard says aloud, in order to decipher this, you would have to see the legacy. But Bernard also knows that Lucas doesn't know what the legacy is, and he doesn't have clearance for it. And the only way to get clearance for it is to make Lucas his shadow, which he does. It's been like the quickest promotion in the world. In episode 7, Bernard brings Lucas Kyle into a room that most people don't even know exists. This thing has tech that Lucas has never seen before. It appears to be like a museum of old relics, the collection of the silo. Bernard hands Lucas what is essentially an iPad and says, that'll give you all the answers you need to know. Just ask it. It's worth noting, though, this iPad is like super, super high tech. So it's going to be awesome when it drops in 2045. But Bernard also tells Lucas that he's already asked the questions that Lucas probably wants to ask. And what he's been able to determine is the silo was built 352 years ago. For what reason, they don't know. And the reason why he's gone through such lengths to give Lucas this access when he looks at Lucas as a dangerous threat is because Lucas can actually solve Salvador Quinn's letter. And the way that Bernard looks at it, if Salvador Quinn went through such great lengths to hide this information, then this, whatever the letter is, could be a bigger threat to the silo than any kind of rebellion. So they need to figure out what is in that letter, and they need to do it quickly. While Lucas is getting acquainted with this museum, I'll call it, an AI-like voice over the loudspeaker tells Bernard that there's a Delta-level event occurring. And that event was from the Down Deep. They were able to get gunpowder and build a rocket that flew up the silo, exploded, and revealed a message to everybody. That message is IT lies to us. Mechanical wants the truth. What happened to Juliet? How did Meadows really die? What is IT hiding? Look and see. As Bernard is reading this in shock, the power to the entire silo goes out, everywhere but IT, which makes IT look really, really bad. And it reinforces the message from Mechanical that IT is, in fact, hiding something. Now, Mechanical does turn the power back on, but this doesn't satisfy the sheriff's department at all. Both Hank and Billings go right after Knox and Shirley and ask, what the hell were you guys thinking? They tell them we had to send a message somehow. Billings tries to get a little bit tough with them about the rules, and Knox cuts him off and says, look, you're the sheriff's department. If you want to do something, find out who poisoned our food. Up top, though, Bernard has a big issue. It's the gunpowder and how exactly Mechanical got it. There's only one person he can currently ask. That's Carla. He asks her how much gunpowder he needs to worry about, but she says, no, what happened to the people that I traveled up here with? If you give me an update, I'll tell you everything you need to know about the gunpowder and how much you have to worry about. But Bernard's not about to make a deal. Not with Carla, at least. Bernard then realizes he needs to get the sheriff's department back on his side. And with Billings and Mechanical, he's able to do that because he can address all of them.
He tells everybody that he shut off radio communication with Billings the previous night because he's under the assumption that Billings was kidnapped, and he's being forced to say the things that he's saying. He does instruct him that until Billings returns, or that they can save him, quote unquote, all radio communication in the silo will be stopped. He is asked about the message from Mechanical, about IT lying to him and why the power was left on in IT, and Bernard says, "You guys realize that Mechanical chooses where the power goes. That was a PR stunt. You guys worry about your job, and Judicial will take care of the rest." Bernard then walks back to his office with Amundsen, and he tells him to just make sure the sheriffs are in line. He then asks for an update on the search warrant for Supply, but Amundsen says, well, Judge Sims hasn't signed it yet. And before he signs off on it, he wants to speak to Bernard, privately. This was something that he discussed with Camille. It's become apparent to Sims that Bernard needs him. Amundsen is just nothing more than a lackey, and Bernard is losing the silo quickly. But Camille's advice was, if you go to him first, that's a gift. If you wait for him to come to you, well, then you're doing business. So that's basically what Sims is doing. But when Bernard shows up in his office, he is pissed. Bernard makes it clear, I don't trust you anymore. You are to sit here and act like you have power, but you do what I tell you to do. Then he instructs him to get out the stamp and give him the search warrant. But Sims says no. Sims feels betrayed because he gave Bernard a decade of his life with the understanding that he would eventually become his shadow. But Bernard never did that, and he turned around and made Lucas Kyle his shadow. Bernard very arrogantly says to him, yeah, I originally had you pegged as my shadow, but then suddenly I didn't, and it occurred to me why. It's because you're very good at solving problems, but you lack curiosity. And that's something the head of IT must have. And thus, the shadow should have that. It's something that my old shadow had, and my new shadow has. Sims, though, starts to mock Bernard right back, reminding him that the team that he surrounded himself with is good. It's just two people. Amundsen and Kyle. But that's it. He's quickly losing support in the silo. He's quickly losing support just about everywhere. He asks him, you didn't know about the gunpowder, did you? No, because Amundsen doesn't know what to look for. I mean, the only reason he was able to save the Raiders the other day was because of me and Camille. And at this point, you're probably wondering, what else am I missing? Well, I'll tell you. You're running out of allies and you're running out of moves. Bernard suddenly gets defensive at this, and he reminds Sims that it was Camille who let the two people from Mechanical that they had both agreed to frame, well, she let them get away. And that was something that Rob didn't really know, was Camille's involvement. Sims goes home, and he waits for Camille. And as soon as Camille walks in the room, she knows what happened. So she starts to explain herself. She tells Rob that when that happened, he had just been sworn in as judge, and he was trying to win Bernard back, which was smart. But she was trying to protect him by making friends, which is also smart. She knew that Bernard would find out one way or the other. What she needed was Bernard to think that she was taking matters into her own hands. Bernard couldn't think that Rob had anything to do with the other two people escaping, which he currently doesn't. Sims, however, is pissed. He says to his wife, you want to make friends with the rebels? I mean, do you know how dangerous that is? And she shoots back, do you know how dangerous Bernard is? We don't know how this is going to end. So until we do, we need to play both sides. Sims is okay with that. What he's not okay with was the backstabbing. He feels like Camille intentionally tried to keep him from talking to Bernard, and she went behind his back and did something without consulting him first. That's what Rob did after his meeting with Bernard. Bernard, however, went back to his office, and he waited for Lucas Kyle to give him an update. It took a while, but Lucas Kyle finally thinks he's figured out the code. It's not letters, it's a page number. The same page number. He excitedly tells Bernard this, but he just hasn't been able to locate the book. He knows it's got to be old. It's got to be old enough so that Salvador Quinn read it. But he thinks that if they can find that particular book and go to that particular page, they'll be able to crack the code. And Bernard actually thinks that he has an idea of what book it is. He pulls out Judge Meadows' copy of The Wizard of Oz, and he hands it to him. Now, while all of that was going on up top, down in Mechanical, Billings and Hank did as they were told. They started looking into who exactly poisoned the food. They went to one such guy that they think would have an idea, or at least a lead. He's kind of a rat. And he tells both of them how they get messages from up top. Now, it's worth mentioning, he has no idea who's sending these messages. He just knows that he gets paid to do it.
But a few of them receive these messages, they do as they're told, and then they get paid. And he tells both of them, there was a message today that said we have to kill Knox and Shirley. So as soon as Billings and Hank hear that, they have to take Shirley and Knox into custody to protect them. Paul and Hank start looking through some filing cabinets to see who could have access to the room where the messages are delivered when Walker comes in. She's shown up because she wants Billings to tell her all about judicial seclusion. He tells her that a lot of people in judicial don't even know about it. And he also knows that a lot of people that went into seclusion don't come out. Billings understands that she's hurting, but he also tells her this isn't doing any good. McLean is in a fortress right now. And Walker asks him, can I get a message to her? But they tell her, unfortunately, no. Porters aren't allowed on the steps anymore near the barricades, and the radios are shut down. A very frustrated Walker tells everybody that 25 years ago she didn't do enough, and that's how she lost Carla in the first place. So she's not about to lose her again because she didn't do enough. Not this time. Walker storms out, but then they get a visit from Billings' wife. She tells them that things are getting out of hand in the cafeteria and they need to go there immediately. And Knox and Shirley tell him, look, with all due respect, they're not going to listen to you. You need to bring us. They'll listen to us. And sure enough, when they get in the cafeteria, there's an all-out riot because they're accusing one of the workers of poisoning the food, but she's adamant, I didn't do it. In fact, I'm the one who told the sheriff's department about the poisoned food. Knox is able to calm the crowd down, but he also is able to figure out who did poison the food. Yes, even though Maeve, the worker in the cafeteria, did alert the sheriff's department to the poisoned food, she's also the one who did it. But she was forced to. She's got family above the blockade with a lot of medical issues. And the people up top threaten her family, saying that they wouldn't get the medical treatment that they needed in order to survive, unless she poisoned the food. So she did what she was told, but she also alerted the sheriff's department because she didn't want anyone to die. And she feels really bad about it, but she also feels like she had no choice. She pleads for them not to kill her, and Knox says, we're not going to kill you. We'll give you some crap for a while, and you'll have to do the job that nobody wants to do, but no, Maeve, we're not going to kill you. Billings then asks about the kill order on Shirley and Knox, and Maeve says, they told me to plant that. They figured it would upset people. And Knox just kind of chuckles and says, yeah, well, it worked. One person, though, who was not at this meeting in the cafeteria was Walker. All she can think about is Carla. That's it. She needs to get a message to her somehow. And if Bernard in IT has shut down the computers, the radios, and porters can't get through, she thinks she has an idea. She hooks up the camera to her office. She knows that that'll get IT's attention. But as quickly as she hooks it up, it seems like she second guesses herself because she quickly takes it down. And even though it was only up for a little bit, it does get the attention of IT. It gets the attention of Almondson. He goes and lets Bernard know that a camera was turned on in the down deep. He looked up who it was, and then he decided to go and look up old footage. Most recently, the footage of her and McLean when they were both taken in. And you see McLean hold Walker's hand. So that caused Almondson to look into the matter even further, and what he found was these two were married 25 years ago. And that's something that Bernard can use to his advantage. Now, over at the other silo, Juliet is looking all over for her suit. She's very thankful to be alive, but she's pissed off at how Solo has handled this. Solo thinks that this will be really easy, though. She's going to dive down with the tube that will allow her to breathe. She hooks it up to the pump, she pulls a lever. That'll ring a bell up top and alert Solo to the fact that he's allowed to turn on the pump, and then it should work. He's then going to hook her up to a pulley system and basically reel her in as bait. But he does tell her the one thing is, I can't reel you in all at once. There's this diver thing called the bends. If I reel you up all at once, you get sick and you could die. So you kind of have to just stop and your body needs to reacclimate to the pressure. Juliet, though, still doesn't want to do it. And Solo throws a temper tantrum. So Juliet caves. She agrees to do this, hooking up the pump in order to get her suit back and get back to her silo. And when she dives down, everything is going as planned. Until she goes to get pulled back up. The lever doesn't work. Juliet, with no air, needs to get up immediately. She can't worry about the bends. And she barely reaches the surface in enough time. When she does, she quickly looks around for Solo, but Solo's nowhere to be found. And when she goes to where Solo would have been located, she doesn't find Solo. But what she does find is a blood trail. And it appears like Solo was attacked. In episode 8, Juliet gets up from the surface, she sees the blood trail, and she realizes pretty quickly that something happened to Solo. She grabs a weapon, and then she slowly starts to make her way up the stairs following the blood trail. But then the bends kicks in. She starts feeling horrible. Luckily, she remembers something that Solo told her. The way to get rid of the bends is you just basically have to reverse the process. You have to go down and wait underwater until you don't feel bad anymore. Remembering this, Juliet grabs an air hose, goes down, and just tries to wait this thing out until she feels okay. And when she does, she comes above the surface and she starts looking for Solo. But she doesn't find Solo. She finds somebody else, who warns her to stay back, and Juliet explains, I'm not here for you, but you took a friend of mine, I'm looking for him, and the whole time, whoever this person is continues to warn her that they are going to shoot. Juliet, though, thinking she can talk her way out of this, continues to blabber on until finally she gets an arrow in the shoulder, and she retreats. She's forced to go to one of the lower levels and just look for a way to bandage this thing up, but she knows at this point these people aren't playing around. However, she still does have to find Solo. He's the only one that knows where the suit is. So after patching herself up, she heads back up, this time armed with a shield and a weapon, and she finds a body that she thinks might be Solo's, but instead it's a trap. It's one of these people, and they attack her. Juliet, though, is much bigger than this person. She rips off the mask, and she reveals that the person's no older than maybe 17, 18, but they're not alone. Because as Juliet is on top of this girl, a boy and a girl who look to be probably in their 20s come running down the steps, the girl holding a bow and arrow like she's Katniss Everdeen, and she warns Juliet that she already put one arrow in her shoulder, and if she makes one more move, she'll put one through her heart. And Juliet is just frozen. Now back over at Juliet's silo, in the Down Deep, things aren't going great. They're quickly running out of supplies and need to figure out a way to get to supply, which is over the barricade. They also know that they need to get some allies from the top because they can't live like this forever. After Shirley writes Cooper's name on the wall full of graffiti that Knox thinks are just people that died in rebellions, she goes and has a talk with Billings. She tells him that while he's down there, he might as well help out, and he says, well, I'll help out as far as the pact allows. She asks him, what does the pact say about stabbing somebody and then blaming others for it? And he tells her he needs proof, but she gets frustrated and says, you know I'm never going to get you proof. The more that Shirley talks about logic and helping, the more Billings keeps bringing up the founders and the pact, which just pisses off Shirley even more. He reminds her that the pact is the word that they live by, and she says no, at some point, you just need to call BS. And then she leaves because she realizes she's not getting anywhere in this convo. This wasn't the only contentious conversation that Paul would have that day with a woman. He also had one with his wife, Kathleen, who was patching up Patrick Kennedy when Patrick mentioned how Billings was in possession of a picture from the before times. This didn't sit well with Billings' wife. And when Billings got home, Kathleen questioned him on it because she felt a little betrayed by this, about the fact that he had a relic that he was stashing away without her knowledge. So he showed it to her, and they both cried at the beauty that had been essentially taken from the silo. While looking at it, she asked Paul, what happened? And Paul, with tears streaming down his face, says, I don't know, and I don't know what to do. As for Shirley, she headed to Walker's workshop for a meeting with a bunch of the others to discuss how they're going to get into supply and get medicals and everything that really you need to function as a society. The best plan that they can come up with is to just use a pulley system and pull people up over the wall. It's not great, but it's the best that everybody can come up with. Walker, however, thinks it's horrible, and she thinks that the plan should be getting Carla back immediately because she is the head of supply. She can help them out. She gets so frustrated, she kicks everybody out of her workshop. But a little while later, she gets an email, which is pretty unusual because all communication throughout the silo has been shut down by IT. But in this case, it's a work request for a water pump up top. The water pump isn't working, and she's somebody who can fix it. So she doesn't really think it's anything out of the norm. But when Shirley finds out, she's convinced that it is a trap for Walker to walk right into. Walker, though, doesn't really care if it is a trap. She feels like it's a win-win. She either fixes the water pump or it's a trap, and maybe they throw her with Carla. The truth is, though, Walker wants to get away from all these people because it's just a reminder of what they're not doing to get the love of her life back. So she heads up the stairs to find out what's going on with this water pump. While she's heading up top, Lucas Kyle continues on his search to find out what Salvador Quinn was talking about in this letter. At the request of Bernard, he heads to Judge Meadows' apartment to see if he can find any clues there. But what he initially finds are members of Judicial. And they don't believe him when he says, "I'm Bernard Holland's shadow," until he flashes a blue badge, indicating that he actually is. And Lucas, who usually is pretty timid, wields this power to kick these members of Judicial out of the room so he can focus. He is able to get a couple words here and there, but he's not able to decipher the whole meaning of the letter. So he gets an idea. He looks up to see if anybody from Salvador Quinn's family are still living in the silo, and he gets a hit. There's a direct descendant of Salvador Quinn living still in the silo, and he goes to pay him a visit. When the door opens up, the direct descendant isn't the one who answers. It's his daughter-in-law. Turns out these are the people that make the wool for the cleanings, but they also make blankets and stuff like that. And at first, she acts like she's never even heard the name Salvador Quinn before. Then, the direct descendant, a guy named Terrence Pembroke, pops his head out, and when he hears Salvador Quinn's name, he tries to rush Lucas away, but Lucas once again wields that blue badge, and he actually tries to get tough with these people, saying that they can either get questioned down low or they can be taken away. All the while, it's very evident that Lucas isn't really comfortable with this Tommy Toughnuts act, but it does work. He ends up getting in the room and questioning this group on Salvador Quinn and whether or not they have any relics of his. Because what he was able to find is that there is certain property that is missing from IT that they believe Salvador Quinn stole and he handed down to his relatives, so he's looking for it. They, however, plead ignorance. They tell him that the name Salvador Quinn has only brought shame to their family. They wouldn't have kept anything of his. Lucas, though, does not believe them. He threatens them with the judicial search team and then leaves to let them think about it, maybe do a thorough search of their own. He doesn't get too far away, though, when Terrence tracks him down. The first thing he does is let him know that this Tommy Toughnuts act is not really working. It's pretty obvious he's not real comfortable with it. And then he tells him, "We don't talk about the name Salvador Quinn. The reason why we make the wool is because we're trying to make up because we're related to the guy that almost took the silo down." A very frustrated Lucas then heads up top to give Bernard the lowdown on the discussion he had with Salvador Quinn's distant relatives. In a throwaway comment, Lucas mentions how Salvador Quinn was a failure because what they've been taught is that he let the rebels burn the books and the servers and erase any history of what happened previously 140 years ago. But Bernard stops him and says, no, Salvador Quinn was not a failure. Salvador Quinn was a hero. Yes, that is the story we've been taught, but the reality is Salvador Quinn saved the silo. Because what Salvador Quinn realized was that every 20, 30 years, there was a rebellion. Because those before knew about the rebellion. And every single rebellion you had risked the opening of the airlock. So what Salvador Quinn did was sever the silo from its history. He cut off access to the servers, he confiscated the books, and he blamed the rebels. But then his masterstroke was putting something in the water that made everybody forget. Within about 2 months, no one remembered that it was Salvador Quinn who did it. They just remember what they've been told, that it was the rebels. What Salvador Quinn did was ensure 140 years of peace, until now. Armed with this information, Lucas heads back to Terrence's apartment. He apologizes to the entire family for how he acted before, and he tells them that while he can't explain why, he knows for a fact that Salvador Quinn was not a failure and not someone that they should be embarrassed about being related to. The girl who initially answered the door tells him that when Judge Meadows visited them, she tried to tell him the same thing. And the fact that Judge Meadows visited this family was something that Lucas had no idea about. So he immediately wants to know, well, what did she want? She wanted books, same as him. She didn't care if they were relics or they were just regular books, but she wanted them if they belonged to Salvador Quinn, and she made a trade for them. They then pulled out the 3 books that Judge Meadows traded for the 1 book that belonged to Salvador Quinn, which was an old copy of the Pact. This is a big hint for Lucas, who heads to Meadows' old apartment looking for that copy of the Pact, and he finds it. He's able to decipher a little bit of it, and it says, "If you've gotten this far, you already know the game is rigged." Lucas, however, was unaware of the fact that by kicking the men out of the apartment earlier, that raised red flags with Judge Sims. He wanted to know why. Initially, he went to Almondson, but Almondson was no help, not willing to tell him any information of what Lucas Kyle was doing. That's when the whole working as a team thing really came in handy because Camille went and talked to Almondson.
She not only reminded Amundsen that both Sims and Amundsen were close, she also pointed out that what's going on with the silo right now isn't great, that the leadership is not there, and that the man that could fix it is Sims if he had some information. So after hearing this pitch, Amundsen caves. He sends Robert a very cryptic email on where to meet, and he tells him where Lucas Kyle was going. The fact that he went to Terrence Pembroke's place, the fact that he took a book from Judge Meadows' apartment, but he doesn't know much. And he also tells Sims, this will be the only time I help you. This was a one and done. So Sims, wanting answers, tracks Lucas down himself, as Lucas was trying to leave Judge Meadows' old apartment. He asks Lucas what he was doing, and Lucas says, I was here because Mayor Holland wanted me to bring him a book. And he shows the pact to Sims. To Sims, it means nothing, but he does give Lucas a warning that once Bernard gets whatever he wants, he will discard Lucas right back to the mines. You might think you know what he wants, and trust me, I thought I did, but he's always going to be 4 moves ahead of you. And before you know it, you're going to need a friend. Watch yourself. That's my advice. Lucas goes to leave, but Sims was not done with the conversation. He says, your mother works in hospice on 85, right? Because I'm guessing she would hate to have her son as a patient. While this scare tactic might work, Lucas plays it cool and he walks away. Now, Bernard, all this time, was in the water pump station, because he's the one who emailed Walker. And when she gets there, she finds out that, yeah, there is nothing wrong with the water pump. He just wanted to talk, because he was going to use the information that Amundsen dug up to his advantage, to end this rebellion. He tells Walker it's really, really simple. If she ever wants to see Carla again, she's going to give him information on how to stop this rebellion in its tracks. And Walker, wanting to save Carla, ends up agreeing to Bernard's terms, reluctantly. She gives up Teddy and the scheme to break into supply and get the necessary items that they currently need. They're all caught. In return, Walker thought she was going to be able to talk to Carla, but no. In fact, she's just able to see her, see that she's alive. She's not even able to talk to her because Carla can't hear her. Bernard tells Walker that no harm is going to come to Carla if she continues to cooperate. Once this is all done, she'll be reunited with Carla. He's also going to need her to return to her workshop and turn the camera back on. And a very frustrated Walker says fine. When she returns, though, she's feeling sick about what she just did, betraying her people. And the first person she sees is Shirley. Shirley gives Walker the update on what happened to Teddy and the team, and Walker has to act like she's surprised by it. Pretty early on in the conversation, though, Shirley notices that something's up with Walker. She's just not acting the same. So when she goes to leave, she tells Walker, you know where to find me if you need anything. But once Shirley does leave, Walker turns to the camera and flips Bernard off. In episode 9, Lucas was able to decipher some more of the message. On top of the whole "this game is rigged" thing, it also says, we think we're the chosen ones, but in fact, we're one of many. The founders didn't just build a single silo, they built 50, which Lucas finds out later is actually 51. And the founders created something called the Safeguard. Then Lucas finally gets the breakthrough that he needs. In Quinn's letter, it says, if you don't believe me, go to the very bottom of the silo. Find the tunnel, you'll get confirmation there. So Lucas goes to update Bernard, but he can't find him. The only person he finds is Amundsen, who says, I'm not supposed to disturb Bernard until later tonight. Bernard, though, is busy in IT keeping tabs on Walker. He knows that eventually he'll find out what the Resistance is up to, and he does. Ever since Teddy and his crew got caught, they need another supply. The problem is they don't know who's on their side. Luckily, though, they are getting an ally slowly. It's the Billings family. Both Paul and Kathleen are slowly becoming believers. Kathleen not understanding why they can't own books with pictures like the one that Paul gave her. Paul not understanding it either. And the more that Kathleen talks to Patrick Kennedy, the more she thinks that there is something that they're not telling them. Especially when Patrick brings up, what if that's not our past? What if that picture is our present? What if it currently looks like that outside and we're just being lied to? Now, yeah, Paul's getting a little bit of pressure from Kathleen, but he's also getting a lot of pressure from Knox, Shirley, and the group to come to their side and help them out. After all, they need somebody from the up top to help them. And Paul does have connections, but he tells them, I don't know if anybody in the sheriff's office would help us out at all. And that's when Knox thinks about the one person who showed him kindness when they were trying to get to the bottom, and that's Camille Sims. So it looks like they do at least have some sort of in, and it's with the judge's wife.
After this meeting in the cafeteria, Knox goes to Walker's workshop where he tells her, "We got great news. We have the sheriff now. We're planning on taking the silo, and when we do, the first person we're going to get is Carla. So we have a plan now." What Knox doesn't know, though, is that this entire conversation is being watched by Bernard, and once Knox leaves, Bernard sends Walker an email. He wants to know what their plan is, even though he heard the entire conversation, and Carla yells into the camera, "How am I supposed to know? You've got me shackled in here." After the meeting with Walker, though, Knox heads to the prison down deep in Hank's office. You've got Hank, Paul, and Knox waiting word to find out if Billings' message to the top got through. He was able to ask a raider who was a friend to deliver a message to Sims. Not Camille Sims, but Rob. And the way he did that was dangling a relic. And not too long after Knox arrives, they get word that there is somebody at the barricade who wants to speak to Billings. And it is, in fact, Sims. Sims kind of tries to play tough about the whole situation, insulting Billings on the fact that he clearly has switched sides. But Billings reminds Rob that it was Camille who helped two people escape back to the down deep. And that once Sims sees exactly what he's going to hand him, he'll understand that Paul had no choice but to cross the line. Or as Paul puts it, well, the line moved. He then hands Sims the picture, the same picture he showed his wife, and he walks down, hoping that that picture created an ally. While Billings was talking to Sims, Knox was able to figure out who the rat was. He goes to Walker to let her know, after all, she is an important figure in the down deep, but Knox has no clue that they're being watched. So when he says aloud, "I figured out who ratted us out," both Walker and Bernard, who's watching from IT, get a little nervous, but then Knox says it was Teddy's mom. Knox had seen her right at the barricade before the raid on Supply, and he figures that Teddy's mom ratted them all out so that nothing would actually happen to Teddy. While it's unfortunate, Knox also says to Walker, "We can't punish her. I mean, not for trying to protect her son." He then switches up the conversation and says, "What we're doing isn't working. We need a new idea." And he has an idea, and it involves the gunpowder that they took from Supply. He's planning on using it. Bernard had seen this entire conversation because he was locked in a room, but not too far away. Sims and Camille sit in their apartment and they look at what Billings handed them. At first, they just wonder if it's real, and they don't know. But then Camille says, "We need to pick a side. They might win if you do what Billings asked. And if they do win, they'll need somebody to run the silo, and that could be you." Rob is a little hesitant to do it because he still thinks that he's seen as the enemy by the Down Deepers. So Camille says, "Fine, I'll do what Billings wants." And while Camille works on that, which is likely getting all the sheriff's department on their side, Rob has an idea of how he can help. He mentions the key that Bernard always has on him with the number 18 on it and how it lights up when things go sideways. He knows that when things go haywire, Bernard uses the key to get into the server room. But as to what's in the server room, he has no idea because he's never been in it. What he does find interesting, though, is the last time he saw Bernard go in there, when Bernard came out, he said, "I have to become mayor." And the only people that have access to the server room is the head of IT or whoever has that key. So Rob is planning on getting that key. That's what Bernard's former second-in-command was up to. As for his current second-in-command, Lucas, after failing to find Bernard, he headed to visit his mom's. He knew that he needed to follow the Quinn letter to get to the bottom of the silo, but in order to do that, he had to go into enemy territory, which was the Down Deep. He didn't want to just leave Quinn's copy of the pact sitting in his apartment or bringing it with him and risking having it taken. He needed to put it in a safe space, so he took it to his mom's. And his mom, who had no idea that he was back, the last time she heard of him, he was sentenced for 5 years into the mines, is very surprised. She wants to make small talk, but he doesn't have time to talk. And they go a little bit back and forth, and finally he just says, "Look, I was a coward before, and I'm not about to be a coward again. I need you to hide this." And when she finally agrees, he takes off for the bottom. He is able to talk his way past the barricade. They do warn him it's dangerous, and sure enough, when he gets through the barricade, he is apprehended right away by people from the Down Deep who do not trust him. He drops the name Juliet Nichols just to keep from being thrown over the side of it, and then he's locked up, as Shirley comes up to examine what exactly is going on with this so-called guy from IT who's flashing a blue badge to everybody. When Lucas first tries to explain to Shirley who he is, Shirley just walks away. But then he gets her to stop right in his tracks by saying, "I think I know what happened to Juliet." and I'll tell you if you help me get to where I need to go. Shirley escorts Lucas right to the bottom of the silo, right where the drill is. And she doesn't believe there's a tunnel down there. She's never seen it. But Lucas points out there's got to be something down there. I mean, there's pumps down there. If not, this whole thing would have been filled with water. So Shirley, who is just as interested in this whole tunnel situation as Lucas to this point, sets up a pulley system to help him get down there. Right before she lowers him, though, she does say, "What happened to Juliet?" And Lucas says, "The last time we heard from her, she was alive. Her helmet went out, but she was alive. So there is a chance that she still is alive. There's hope." As for any more details, he just doesn't have it. But for Shirley, the hope, that's enough for her. As for Lucas, he does get slowly dropped down. He makes his way to the bottom of the water, and yeah, it's probably waist high. And when he looks around, he is able to locate the tunnel that Quinn was talking about. When he walks deep in the tunnel, though, that's when lights pop up. And that voice that he heard from the relic room, that sort of quasi-museum that alerted Bernard to the event that was happening when Mechanical shot the rocket up, that voice echoes again. It says, "Lucas Kyle, why are you here?" And Lucas says, "Salvador Quinn sent me." The voice explains that before Lucas, only 3 people had made it this far. It was Salvador Quinn, it was Meadows, and it was George. The only 2 people he talked to, though, were Meadows and Salvador Quinn. It then says, "If you speak to anybody about what you see down here, we will have no choice but to initiate the safeguard. Do you know what the safeguard is?" And Lucas says yes. As for Juliet, she's back at the other silo. She is frozen by this wannabe Katniss Everdeen, but it turns out these people were here the entire time. In fact, they had watched Juliet arrive. Now, it's just a bunch of kids, I mean, really teenagers, but you've got their leader, the wannabe Katniss, who's named Audrey. You've got her boyfriend, Rick, and then you've got the third person, the person that Juliet attacked, ripped the mask off. They call her Eater. And Audrey didn't trust Juliet from the start, mainly because she had teamed up with Solo. And Solo had killed their parents. So taking Solo was really personal for them. And with Juliet begging to let him go, they were not inclined to do that. Juliet explains that Solo has something she needs, and when she gets it, she can leave. No harm, no foul. And Rick says, "I'll tell you what, get us the food from his vault. If you get us that, then yeah, you can talk to him." And Juliet doesn't know the code, but Rick doesn't care. He says, "Figure it out." Eater even agrees to go with Juliet to help out. And Audrey, who thinks this is a bad plan, says, "Fine. You know what? My baby just ate, and she's going to cry again when she's hungry. And when she cries again, you better have gotten into that vault. And if you haven't, I'm going to put an arrow through his head." If you have small children, you know time is not on Juliet's side, so her and Eater head off to try to find out what this combination to the vault is. While Juliet looks for the code, Eater confides in her that she is hated by this group, because her parents had asked them to take her in. But with an extra mouth to feed, they needed more food, and they were the ones who were trying to get in Solo's vault, which they must have been able to get into, because Solo just would have stayed in there. But these people were clearly murdered. So the way that Juliet figures, they must have figured out the code, gotten in, and then, Solo did what he had to do. But after the parents were murdered, that's when Audrey and the group started calling her Eater, because she was the reason why they had to go get food. She had to eat. And they've held it against her ever since. They won't even give her a name. After searching, they've been able to narrow it down as 6 numbers, but after punching in 2, it's incorrect, and they only have one more chance until they're locked out for 24 hours. So they have a 25% chance of getting this right, and they don't want to risk it. Juliet goes to Rick and says, "I need to talk to him." And it's not just because Juliet wants to get the number out of him. She's also figured out who Solo is. This whole time, Solo had been saying that he was the IT shadow. He was the IT shadow, but it didn't add up. Not just the picture, but his attitude, the timeline of things. What she was able to figure out was that his dad was the head of IT. And when all this went down, Solo was 12 years old. He was a kid. Solo's real name is Jimmy. So armed with this new information, she figures she can use it to get Solo to give her the code. As she's trying to do this and explaining to Solo who he actually is because she's been able to figure it out, the baby starts crying. Audrey runs in with the bow and arrow, but it's Rick who stops her and says, This is our best chance of getting food. Everybody's hungry, so just cool it. And Solo feels really apologetic about what happened, but he's also shook by it. He says that he had fallen asleep when they got in, and he left a gun right by the door, which they used to shoot him. In order to kind of defend himself, he trapped them in a room, and they couldn't breathe. They suffocated to death. In order to prove this story is correct, he shows them the bullet wound. Solo starts beating himself up, though, because he thinks he's a coward. When the events in this particular silo happened, his dad locked him in that vault and said, don't open it up for anything. The sheriff, though, grabbed Jimmy's dad. He put a gun to his head and said, open the door, and Jimmy refused. So the sheriff shot his dad right in front of a 12-year-old Jimmy, and he's been shook ever since. But because he didn't save his dad, he's always felt like a coward. And Juliet says, you're not a coward. He would be so proud of you. You did what he wanted you to do. Your dad wanted to save you, just like Audrey wants to save her baby right now. And when Solo finds out that this group has a baby, it changes everything. Now, they don't just have a baby, they have a couple kids with them that seem to be stragglers. But this information gets Solo to open the vault and invite them in. And the vault is beautiful. It's got books, it's got a ton of food, it's got music, and it has Juliet's fire suit. But actually, Juliet didn't need it. Because as she was searching for the information regarding the code, it led her to Jimmy's old place, the apartment that he grew up in, which had a suit, because the head of IT always had a suit. But even after finding this, Juliet still stuck to her word that she would try to get the code in order to save Solo's life. Solo does feel bad about it, not telling her about the suit, but he does ask, if you knew about the suit, why didn't you just take it and get out of here? And then he realizes it's because Juliet does consider him a friend, or at least she owes him. In episode 10, Juliet's decided to use the actual suit that's made to go outside instead of the firefighter suit, which means that she's going to have to go back to Jimmy's old apartment he grew up in. And Jimmy hasn't been there in a while, so it's a big trip down memory lane for him. As he starts remembering the last time he was there, which is when the rebellion kicked off, Juliet reminds him that she needs to get the suit because she needs to go. Solo, though, just wants to spend a few more minutes in the apartment, and he starts looking around, and he sees something that jogs a memory that Juliet needs to know about. So he runs after her. He stops her, and she's a little frustrated because, as I said, she needs to go, but he says, no, this could save your silo. He explains to her about the safeguard procedure, how he heard his parents whispering about it, but the morning of the rebellion, his parents figured out a way to stop it. He tells her that if she learns what to do, she could keep her silo from dying because this safeguard, it kills everybody. He knows that whatever his parents did, it worked because the people that got outside didn't die at first. But finding out how to stop the safeguard, that's a trickier situation. He doesn't really know what he's looking for. He then starts thinking hard about it and he says, wait, the safeguard, it's a pipe. They start looking over blueprints and they find out that the pipe is located on level 14. It pumps poison in from the outside, and it kills everybody. And that makes sense because Solo mentions how his mom worked on that level. She runs back to go put the suit on that she got from Solo's apartment, but unfortunately, it's tattered up. It looks like rats got into it. There's holes everywhere. And Audrey starts blaming Eater, whose real name is Hope, but Juliet doesn't stand for it. She yells back at Audrey, you need to stop. This was not her fault. None of this was her fault. Solo was 12 years old when the events took place. When your parents died, Hope was a baby. Stop fighting amongst yourselves. Don't get mad at each other. Get mad at the people that put us in here. Because right now, all you have is each other. Just like for me, all I have are my friends and my family, my dad, who are back at my silo. That's why I have to get back. She calms down a little bit. She looks around because she remembers that she has the fire suit, but it's gone. And that's when Rick mentions, yeah, Jimmy just left. Juliet panics a little bit, but it turns out that Jimmy was doing nothing more than testing it out. He put on the suit, he put on the helmet, he put on tape, and he went in the water, and he was still dry. So he tells Juliet, this thing should work perfectly for you. Everybody then helps Juliet strap up into the suit. They also help her make a sign that says, it's dangerous out, don't come outside. Hope asks Juliet, you're going to come back, right? But Juliet says, I don't want to lie to you guys. And when it's just the two of them, Jimmy asks her the same question. And Juliet, realizing that Jimmy is a little more fragile-minded than the other group, says, I will do everything in my power to get back to you. And then she heads out back to her silo, where it is complete chaos. When Shirley got the info from Lucas Kyle on the fact that Juliet might still be alive, she grabbed Knox and she grabbed Juliet's dad. She had to tell both of them for obvious reasons. And Dr. Nichols says, I've heard this before. Patients come in and they say, your daughter's alive, but this is the first time I actually believe you guys. But as he's digesting all of this, Knox says, Dr. Nichols, we need you for something way more pressing. And what he's talking about is the fight that's about to take place. The three of them then head to Walker's workshop. You've also got Hank and Billings there as well. They know that resources are running out. It's only a matter of time before that barricade comes down on them. So they got to do something, and they have to do it fast. Knox tells them that in 1 hour, he's going to lead a team that will storm the barricade, and shortly after that, Shirley will lead a second wave. But it's all a distraction. What they really want to do is hook up the generator with that gunpowder and TNT. It's going to take about 3 hours. So the distraction at the barricade needs to last that long. Of course, they don't know that Bernard is watching all of this. He now knows their plan, and he loses it. He goes to Amundsen and he says, get every raider to the barricade immediately. We have to protect the generator. So before Knox and his team can storm the barricade, the raiders arrive first. It doesn't really allow Knox and Shirley and the group to get their footing for this rebellion. I mean, they grab weapons and they try to fight back, but it doesn't work. They're all arrested. And by the way, that includes Lucas Kyle, who was trying to make his way up the stairs after getting back from the tunnel and seeing what he saw. He was also arrested because they don't know who the hell he is, and he was thrown in jail. A makeshift jail. It's the cafeteria. Billings was also arrested because Bernard had told all the sheriffs that Billing had gone off and he was a rogue asset at this point. He had been stripped of being the sheriff. There was no makeshift sheriff. The position was vacant at that point. But he also needed to be brought in, which raised a lot of eyebrows in the sheriff community because they know Paul. They know he's not that type. But they had to follow orders, which included arresting Billings. Yeah, pretty much everybody was arrested. I mean, I'm talking Patrick Kennedy, Knox, Shirley, Billings, you name it, they were brought in. And with everybody being escorted to the makeshift prison, Bernard checks that little key, and there's no blinking going on, so his mind is at ease. He thinks he just avoided a rebellion. The group, though, that had that meeting in Walker's office, they were all brought to a separate prison, and this included Walker. They were thrown in a jail where Carla is waiting for them. She's awake, she's responsive, and for Walker, this is great news. Until Amundsen basically rats her out. He tells her that Bernard really appreciates her contribution to the silo and that her and Carla are free to go. Well, when Carla realizes that it was Walker who was the rat the entire time, she says, I'm not going anywhere with you. A very panicked Walker looks at Amundsen and says, I have to talk to Bernard. And Amundsen says, yeah, I think for you, he'll make an exception. He'll talk to you. But before Walker goes and talks to Bernard, Carla has a parting shot and says, I hope he sends you out to clean. Walker gets her meeting with a very relieved Bernard, and she says, I got a story to tell you. The generator's pretty loud down there, and it caused us to create a hand signal type of way to communicate. And we got so many hand signals, you can basically have a full conversation going on without ever actually opening your mouth. So with this makeshift sign language, when Knox first came into her workshop, she signaled to him that they were being watched, and he changed his tune right away. So that whole thing about the generator and all of it, it was a ruse. It was a diversion for the real plan. The real plan had the sheriff's office, or at least most of them, on their side. While Walker is talking to Bernard, Knox, Shirley, Carla, Paul, they're all let go. The second wave of this was Dr. Nichols' involvement. He, as a doctor, would be able to get through the barricade. They were going to strap Hank up in a Raider uniform, put him on a gurney and make it look like he needed medical attention in order to do that. But in reality, there was just a bunch of TNT there. While Bernard's men were looking at a generator that they never intended to blow up, what they really were going to blow up was the stairs. Unfortunately, though, on the exit, Dr. Nichols dropped the trigger, and there was only one way to detonate. Someone had to do it, so he volunteered. Right before he told Hank to get out of there, he gave Hank Juliet's watch that was given to him. He said, if she is alive and she comes back, you give this to her, and you tell her that she was perfect, and she was always perfect. And then he blows himself up, but he destroys a lot of the stairs in the process. When Bernard hears the explosion, he gets really mad and he asks Walker, "What did you do?" And with a shit-eating grin on her face, she says, "Oh, not just me," and she dumps out all of the deputies' badges. With the sheriffs on their side and the stairs between 92 and 90 completely destroyed, the Down Deep have taken over. They're able to free all the people that were arrested and they start heading up, with the goal to take over IT, which they should be able to easily do with all the raiders down low. With a very shell-shocked Bernard trying to figure out how he's going to save IT, he finally runs into Lucas Kyle. Lucas gets really close to him and says, "I need you to act like we are having a very serious conversation, because if they hear this, they will kill all of us." He then tells Bernard that he solved the code, and he seemingly tells him what he saw in that tunnel. Although we don't know what exactly he did see, we don't hear the conversation, but he does tell Bernard, "That's why Meadows quit, and that's why I quit." And whatever it is that Lucas Kyle told Bernard, it has Bernard completely floored. I mean, shook to his core. He starts slowly making his way up the steps. He runs into Sims, and he says, "Hey, you still want to be my shadow? Here you go. It's your job." And he just hands him the key with 18 on it. Lucas, though, went right to his mother's place. That's where he wanted to be when he felt like it was all going to end. Because in Lucas's mind, there was no way that any of them survived what was about to take place, either a rebellion or a safeguard procedure, one of the two. As he's talking to his mother, Sims busts in with a gun, demanding to know what Lucas told Bernard, because it's pretty clear whatever it was bad. And Lucas, who is giving big "I don't give a fug" attitude, tells Sims that Bernard made the mistake of thinking that everything was okay because the key wasn't lighting up, when in reality, the key wasn't lighting up because it's over. Sims asks, "What's over, the rebellion?" But Lucas says no. And I can't tell you. In fact, I won't tell you. So you're going to have to kill me. It's not going to matter. You should go, use the key, get in the vault, see the legacy while there's still time. You'll know it when you see it. That's what Sims does. He grabs his wife, his child, and he heads into the vault in IT. He hears the same voice that talked to Lucas Kyle in the tunnel. And when it asks Rob what he's doing there, Rob says, "I'm here to save the silo." And the voice says, "I want to do the same thing. So what I need you to do is take you and your son and leave. Camille can stay." As for Bernard, he went to his apartment. He grabbed the suit that was made for him, and then he went to the sheriff's office that was right by the door, and he locked himself in. With the rebellion breathing down his neck, they were demanding answers. But Bernard was not going to give them any. Not after what he heard. He was planning on going outside. The entire rebellion, though, is frozen in their tracks when they see outside Juliet show up. And they all celebrate. She goes up to the camera, she cleans it, she shows her face, she shows the sign that says, "Not safe, do not come out." And then she waits to get inside. After about a minute, the door opens up. She starts making her way down the stairwell. But when the door to the outside opens up, it's not a welcome party. It's Bernard pointing a gun at her. She's pretty taken aback, but she does say, "If you wanted to shoot me, I'd be already dead by now." Bernard, though, tells her there's no point trying to save them. It's out of your hands. It was never in your hands. It was never in my hands. It was never in any of our hands. And Juliet says, "Why? Because of the poison they can pump in?" "Yeah, I know about that. Now, I don't know who would do it or why they'd do it." And Bernard says, "I know the who, but I don't know the why, and I don't really care. After all I've done, after all I've sacrificed to find out that it never really mattered." I mean, even the term, safeguard procedure, it's an innocuous term that means that they can kill us whenever they want. But Juliet says, "No, maybe not. I think I figured something out." But then she starts to hear the vault door close, and instinctively she goes to go inside of it. She doesn't want to get locked out. But Bernard tries to stop her, knowing what's going to happen when that door closes. So he tries to grab her, but Juliet pulls him inside. And the reason why Bernard was trying to stop her was because after the door closes, that little room becomes an incinerator. And both Bernard and Juliet get lit up. But only one of them's wearing a fire suit. But the true reveal in this episode is the before times. We finally get a wrinkle of maybe what happened. There's a junior senator that has a date, at least he thinks, in a bar. Through the small talk that the couple are making, they're discussing a dirty bomb that hit DC thanks to Iran. The woman wants to know if the government, which he is a part of, are planning a response, and he doesn't feel comfortable answering. He's a little hurt because he did think this was a date. It's clearly not, and because he thought it was a date, he brought a gift, and that gift was the Pez dispenser. The Pez dispenser that nobody knows what it is in the silo. It's a relic. Well, in the before times, it was nothing more than a candy dispenser. And I guess the U.S. government did, in fact, retaliate. And that is the end of Season 2 of Silo. Thank you so much for getting this part of the recap. I really appreciate it. Consider subscribing to the channel. Hit thumbs up if you like this. Smash that thumbs down button if you thought it sucked. You could become a member. That's cool. It also helps me out. Be nice in the comments section. Like if I made a mistake, just let it go. Mistakes happen. Like going into a room that eventually becomes an incinerator. They didn't mean to do that, right? You're not going to criticize them. Why would you criticize me? Hurts my feelings. Just know, though, if you got this far, I really do appreciate your support, and I hope you're back for Season 3.